You have exactly 3 seconds to explain why a diaper-wearing civilian is currently chewing on the death warrant of the Seoul police chief. Gwan Jin-ho's voice sliced through the air of his private sanctuary like a blade drawn in the dark. He didn't raise his tone. He never needed to. Men who controlled Seoul's underworld through fear had learned that whispers killed more efficiently than screams. Sir, Denise's voice cracked as she stood in the forbidden doorway, her cleaning uniform still damp from the basement laundry. Please, I didn't know he could crawl that fast. I just turned around for 1 second. The rest of her apology died in her throat. Because the baby sitting beneath Jin-ho's mahogany desk, the desk where men's fates were sealed with red ink and cigarette ash, looked up at the crime lord with eyes that held no concept of death. And then Malik smiled, drool glistening on his chin, and reached up with both chubby hands toward the man they called the Butcher of Busan. Papa. Jin-ho's hand, which had been resting on the grip of the Glock beneath his armrest, went rigid. A muscle jumped in his jaw, the only visible crack in the mask he wore like armor. His eyes, black as gun oil, narrowed into slits that had made generals weep. What? He breathed, each word dropping like a stone into frozen water. Did that child just call me? Denise's heart tried to claw its way out of her chest. Because she could see it now, in the harsh lamplight that turned Jin-ho's study into an interrogation room. The way Malik's eyes were the same deep brown, the way his nose had that same strong bridge, the way his brow furrowed with the same intensity when he concentrated on tearing the classified document into confetti. No, it's not possible. We've never. Welcome to the channel. If you're ready for a story where the diapers are more dangerous than the guns, rate our video on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments right now. Jin-ho didn't move. He sat in the leather chair that had cost more than Denise would earn in 5 years of scrubbing blood from marble floors. His office occupied the entire 3rd floor of the 7 Stars compound, a fortress within a fortress where even his own lieutenants entered only by invitation. The temperature was always kept cold. Cold kept people alert, kept them from getting comfortable, kept them remembering that this was where careers ended and bodies began. Gwan Jin-ho was 34 years old, attractive in a way that made people think of predators sizing up prey, and known throughout Seoul's criminal networks as the Butcher of Busan. A title he'd earned at 23 when he'd systematically dismantled a rival syndicate by starting with their accountant and working his way up to the boss's firstborn son. He didn't just eliminate threats. He erased them from existence, along with everyone who'd ever heard their names. Today was supposed to be strategic. He was finalizing the hit list for a government official who'd forgotten which campaign donations required reciprocation. The red folder on his desk contained surveillance photos, building schematics, a timetable calibrated to the second. He had a fountain pen in his hand, vintage, Japanese, the kind that made signing death warrants feel like calligraphy. But then the door to his sanctuary had opened, not with the sharp knock his men knew to give, not with a hesitant tap of his accountant bringing bad news, just opened, a slow, thoughtless swing. Jin-ho had expected Lieutenant Seok, or perhaps one of his soldiers coming to deliver a status report. Instead, he saw nothing at standing height. He looked down. Crawling across the Persian rug, the one he'd taken from a Russian arms dealer who tried to double-cross him, was a baby. The child wore a striped romper with a lion patch on the chest, colors bright and garish against the room's burgundy and black palette. Malik had tight curls that bounced with each awkward forward lurch and skin the color of warm amber. He didn't look frightened. He looked fascinated, like he'd discovered a new playground. Jin-ho had watched, locked in place by sheer absurdity, as Malik crawled past the katana mounted on the wall, a blade that had opened 7 throats in a single night, past the locked cabinet containing blackmail material on 3 senators, past the crystal decanter of scotch that cost more per ounce than gold, right up to the massive desk where empires rose and fell on Jin-ho's signature. Malik grabbed the edge of Jin-ho's trousers. The fabric was bespoke, cut in Milan, a shade of charcoal that didn't show bloodstains. Now it was being crushed by hands sticky with what appeared to be mashed banana. The baby used Jinho's leg as leverage, pulling himself up on wobbling legs that barely supported his weight. He achieved vertical. He giggled, a wet, bubbling sound of pure delight, and then he said the word that stopped time. Papa. The East Wing guest suite had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a garden Denise hadn't known existed. For 3 days, she'd lived in a space larger than the apartment she'd shared with 5 other women in the staff quarters, eating food that arrived on covered trays 3 times a day, watching Malik crawl across carpet, so thick it left marks where his knees pressed into the pile. For 3 days, she'd waited for the other shoe to drop, for the door to burst open, for Jinho to change his mind, for whatever temporary insanity had spared her life to wear off. On the 4th morning, Malik disappeared. Denise had turned her back for 30 seconds, just long enough to use the bathroom, just long enough to splash water on her face and wonder if this was what going insane felt like. When she came out, the main room was empty. The door she'd been certain she'd locked stood open, just a crack, just enough for a determined baby to push through. Her heart stopped. Then it started again, racing so fast she thought it might crack her ribs. Malik, her voice came out strangled. She ran to the hallway, empty. The corridor stretched in both directions, all dark wood and darker shadows, the kind of silence that meant nowhere to hide and everywhere to die. Malik. She chose left because left led deeper into the compound, into the parts of the building where even the other household staff wouldn't go without explicit permission. The forbidden wing. Jinho's private quarters. Denise ran. Her bare feet slapped against marble floors cold enough to burn. She passed doors that were closed, locked, hiding whatever horrors men like Jinho needed privacy to conduct. She passed paintings that probably cost more than her father's entire debt, the one that had put her here in the first place. She passed a guard stationed at a corner who shouted something at her, but she couldn't stop, couldn't slow down, couldn't do anything but follow the trail of destruction. A Ming vase knocked askew on its pedestal, a door left ajar that should have been sealed, a smear of what looked like pureed carrots on a priceless credenza. The trail ended at a door made of solid mahogany, carved with 7 stars in a circle. She'd seen that symbol on the black card Jinho had given her. The door was cracked open. Through the gap, she heard Malik's giggle. Denise's hand shook as she pushed the door wider. She expected to die. Expected a bullet between the eyes, expected to find her son's body, expected the universe to finally collect on the debt of her continued survival. Instead, she saw a room that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed comfort was weakness. No art on the walls, no photographs, just a massive desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a leather chair that faced away from the door. Malik sat on the floor beneath the desk, playing with something that glinted metal in the lamplight. As Denise's eyes adjusted, her stomach dropped. Her son was holding a pistol magazine, rolling it between his chubby hands like a toy car. Malik, no. She lunged forward. A hand caught her wrist mid-reach, fingers wrapping around bone with exactly enough pressure to stop her without breaking anything. She hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen him standing in the shadow by the bookshelf, but Jinho was there now, still wearing last night's clothes, shirt untucked, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair slightly mussed in a way that made him look more dangerous, not less. He already took the bullets out, Jinho said, his voice rough with something that might have been exhaustion or might have been something worse. Check the floor. Denise looked down. Scattered around Malik like brass confetti were 15 rounds of ammunition, each one carefully extracted and examined and discarded. Her son had disarmed a weapon before he'd learned to use a toilet. How did he? He watched me do it last night. Jinho released her wrist. I was cleaning my sidearm. He was supposed to be asleep on the couch, apparently. He has your talent for being places he shouldn't be. There was no anger in his voice. That terrified her more than rage would have. I'm so sorry, boss. I don't know how he got out. I locked the door, I swear The lock is electronic. Jinho moved to his desk, stepping around Malik with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield. It deactivates from the inside. Fire code. I should have told you that. He sat in his chair and picked up a glass of something amber that had been sitting there long enough to leave a ring on the wood. Your son has been here for 20 minutes. In that time, he has disassembled a weapon, knocked over my coffee, and attempted to eat a classified document about a shipping route for stolen medical supplies. He is either remarkably intelligent or remarkably suicidal. I haven't determined which. Denise couldn't breathe. The room was too cold, too quiet, too full of the kind of tension that preceded violence. She looked at the guards she now noticed flanking the door, 2 of them, both armed, both watching Malik the way people watched unexploded ordnance. I'll take him back, she managed. Right now. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I can tie the door shut or sleep in front of it or... Why would you do that? Jinho took a drink, studying her over the rim of his glass. He's not hurting anything. Denise stared at him. The butcher of Busan, the man who'd allegedly once shot a traitor at a dinner table while the soup course was being served, was sitting in his private office watching a baby play with ammunition like it was the most normal thing in the world. He's in your office, boss. You're private. I'm aware where my office is located. Jinho set down his glass. I'm also aware that your son has better security instincts than most of my men. When he crawled in here, he didn't head for the door or the windows. He went straight for the desk. Do you know why? Denise shook her head, mute. Because the desk is the most defensible position in the room. Back to the wall, sight lines to all entry points, solid cover. Jinho's eyes tracked to Malik, who had abandoned the magazine and was now trying to pull himself up using the desk drawer handles. He's been trained. He's a baby. He hasn't been trained for anything. Then it's instinct. Jinho stood, walking around the desk to crouch beside Malik. The boy looked up at him and smiled, all gums and drool and absolute trust. Instinct is better. Training can be beaten out of someone. Instinct runs deeper. He held out his hand. Malik grabbed his finger with both hands, using it to haul himself vertical. When he achieved standing, he wobbled, steadied himself, and then took a single lurching step toward Jinho before falling directly into his chest. Jinho caught him automatically. It was the kind of reflex that saved lives in firefights, now deployed to prevent a baby from face-planting into Persian carpet. Papa, Malik announced, patting Jinho's chest with both hands like he was checking for weapons. He's still doing that, one of the guards asked. He sounded amused. That was a mistake. Jinho's head turned slowly, his eyes finding the man with the precision of a laser sight acquiring a target. Do you have something to say, Yong? The guard's smile evaporated. No, boss, I'm sorry, boss. You should be. Jinho shifted Malik to one arm, awkwardly, like someone holding a bag of groceries they weren't quite sure how to carry. Because if you find it funny that a child has breached my private office twice in 4 days, that means you think my security is funny. And if my security is funny, that means you're not doing your job. His voice never rose above conversational volume. It didn't need to. Are you doing your job, Yong? Yes, boss. Absolutely, boss. Then explain to me how a baby who can barely walk managed to get past you and into a wing of this compound that requires keycard access. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded executions. Yong swallowed. He must have crawled through the service corridor, the one the kitchen staff use. There's no keycard on that entrance because it's supposed to be too narrow for an adult to fit through. Jinho's expression didn't change, which means our security is designed to stop adults, not children, not rats, not anyone creative enough to think like something other than a soldier. He looked at the other guard. Dee, go get Lieutenant Siok. Tell him I need to see him. Now. Dee left so fast, he nearly tripped over his own feet. Denise watched this happen with the detached numbness of someone watching their own execution. Jinho had just demonstrated, with terrifying efficiency, that her son's intrusion hadn't been treated as a cute accident. It had been analyzed, weaponized, turned into evidence of a systemic failure that would cost someone dearly. Boss, she started, please don't punish them because of my... I'm not punishing anyone because of you. Jinho returned to his chair, still holding Malik, who had discovered the buttons on his shirt and was attempting to pop them off one by one. I'm punishing them because they failed. Your son just taught me that this compound has a vulnerability I didn't know about. That's valuable information. It's also embarrassing information, which means I need to make it very clear that embarrassing me is not a viable career strategy. He said this while letting a baby pull his collar open, exposing the tattoo that covered his collarbone, 7 stars in black ink, each one representing a sworn brother he'd killed when they'd tried to take his territory. Malik touched the stars with one finger, tracing the pattern like he was reading Braille. He likes you, Denise said. She didn't know why she said it, didn't know what she thought it would accomplish. But the words came out anyway, small and true and desperately stupid. He doesn't know me. Jinho caught Malik's hand before he could stick his finger in Jinho's mouth. He knows a voice he heard on TV and a man who hasn't kicked him across the room yet. That's not liking me. That's surviving me. Is there a difference? The question came out before she could stop it. Jinho's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw the exact moment he decided whether to take offense or take interest. The decision seemed to land somewhere in between. In this building, he transferred Malik to his other arm, the motion smoother now, like he was learning the weight distribution in real time. No, there's no difference. People who like me end up dead just as quickly as people who hate me. The only difference is the people who like me usually die surprised. Malik yawned, a huge, jaw-cracking yawn that showed all 4 of his teeth. Then he laid his head on Jinho's shoulder and closed his eyes, like he'd decided this was nap time, and this was the designated napping location. Jinho froze. His free hand hovered in the air, uncertain, before finally settling on Malik's back in what might have been a supportive gesture if it didn't look like he was checking for concealed weapons. What is he doing? Jinho asked, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been panic if the butcher of Busan was capable of panic. Falling asleep. Why is he doing that here? Because he feels safe. Denise took a step closer, drawn by the sheer absurdity of the scene. Her son, her baby, passing out on the shoulder of Seoul's most wanted crime lord like it was the most natural thing in the world. He always sleeps better when someone's holding him. I'm not someone. Jinho's expression suggested he'd just been handed a live grenade and told to juggle it. I run an organization that has disappeared people for less than breathing wrong in my presence. He's a baby. He doesn't care about your resume. The door opened. Lieutenant Siak entered, his suit immaculate, his smile fixed in place like armor. He was older than Jinho by a decade, handsome in a polished way, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in boardrooms and political fundraisers rather than rooms where people died. He bowed, the gesture precise and shallow. Boss, you wanted to see me. His eyes tracked to Malik, still sleeping on Jinho's shoulder. The smile didn't waver, but something behind it sharpened. We have a security problem, Jinho said. This child has now breached my private wing twice. Once might be an accident. Twice is a pattern, which means somewhere in our security infrastructure there's a gap large enough for a baby to crawl through. I need it found and I need it sealed. Today. Of course, boss. Siak's gaze moved to Denise, lingering just long enough to make her skin crawl. Though if I may suggest, the simplest solution would be to remove the child from the premises entirely. If he's not in the compound, he can't breach security. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Are you, Jinho said very quietly, suggesting I should throw out a baby? I'm suggesting the child represents a liability. His mother is here to pay off a debt. She's not family. She's not. She's under my protection. Jinho shifted Malik, the motion protective in a way that looked instinctive rather than calculated. Which means her son is under my protection. Which means if you're suggesting I break my word and violate my own guarantee of safety, you're suggesting I'm a man who can't be trusted. Is that what you're suggesting, Lieutenant? Siak's smile finally cracked. No, boss, of course not, I only meant. I know what you meant, and I'm telling you to find the vulnerability and fix it. not remove the evidence that it exists. Jinho's eyes, when they met Siak's, were colder than permafrost. That's an order, not a suggestion. Understood, boss. Siak bowed again, deeper this time, and left. As the door closed behind him, Jinho looked down at Malik, who had started snoring softly, his breath warm against Jinho's neck. Your son just made me an enemy, he told Denise. I'm sorry, I didn't. Don't apologize. Jinho stood, moving toward the leather couch against the wall with the careful steps of someone trying not to wake a sleeping bomb. Siak has been waiting for an excuse to question my judgment for months. Your son didn't create the problem. He revealed it. There's a difference. He laid Malik down on the couch, arranging him with the kind of meticulous care someone might use to defuse an explosive. Then he pulled off his jacket and draped it over the baby like a blanket. The jacket was worth more than Denise's yearly salary. Malik drooled on the silk lining and kept sleeping. Jinho stared at the sleeping child for a long moment. Then he looked at Denise. Your son has been in my office for 30 minutes and he's already started a war, he said. Either he's the luckiest baby in Seoul or the most dangerous. I'm starting to suspect it's both. Denise wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that Malik was just a baby, just innocent, just a child who didn't understand any of this. But she looked at her son sleeping peacefully under a crime lord's jacket in a crime lord's office, and she realized that maybe innocence was its own kind of weapon. Maybe the most dangerous thing in this compound wasn't the guns or the knives, or the men who knew how to use them. Maybe it was a baby who didn't know enough to be afraid. Lieutenant Siak returned at precisely 9 the following morning, which Jinho knew because he'd been awake since 4, watching Malik sleep in the corner of his office in a hastily assembled play area that had cost more to construct overnight than most people earned in a year. The compound's procurement team had looked at him like he'd lost his mind when he'd ordered a crib, changing table, and enough toys to stock a department store delivered before sunrise. He'd stared back until they remembered that questioning the butcher of Busan was a luxury reserved for people with death wishes. Now Malik sat surrounded by wooden blocks and stuffed animals that still had price tags attached, completely ignoring the fortune in toys in favor of trying to eat the leg of Jinho's desk. Siak knocked twice, entered without waiting for permission, a liberty he'd been taking more frequently in recent months, and stopped short when he saw the domestic tableau. His expression flickered through surprise, calculation, and settled on the bland professional mask he wore like a second skin. Boss, he said, inclining his head, I've completed the security audit you requested. The service corridor has been retrofitted with weight-sensitive pressure plates and motion sensors. Nothing larger than a cat will pass through undetected going forward. Show me the report. Jinho gestured to the chair across from his desk. He didn't miss the way Siak's eyes tracked to Malik, lingering just a fraction too long to be casual. Siak settled into the chair with the ease of someone who'd sat there 1,000 times before, pulling a tablet from his briefcase. I've also identified 3 other potential vulnerabilities: the laundry chute on the 2nd floor, the ventilation system in the east wing, and interestingly, a gap in our surveillance coverage in this very hallway. The cameras cycle every 90 seconds. There's a blind spot. He slid the tablet across the desk. Jinho took it, scanning the technical diagrams with the focused attention he gave to anything that might kill him. Siak had always been thorough. It was one of the reasons Jinho had promoted him to lieutenant in the first place, back when Jinho had still believed that competence and loyalty were related. The blind spot, Jinho said, not looking up. How long has it existed? According to the maintenance logs, approximately 7 months, since the last system upgrade. Siak leaned back, his posture relaxed in a way that somehow felt rehearsed. I've already scheduled technicians to install additional cameras. They'll be here this afternoon. Malik abandoned the desk leg and crawled toward Jinho's chair, pulling himself up using the leather armrest. He achieved vertical, wobbled dangerously, then lurched forward with both arms outstretched in the universal gesture of pick me up or I will scream. Jinho, without breaking eye contact with the tablet, reached down and hauled Malik into his lap. The motion was becoming automatic. That should have worried him more than it did. 7 months, Jinho repeated, which means anyone who knew about the gap could have been using it to move through this wing undetected for half a year. Theoretically, yes. Siok's smile was apologetic, understanding exactly the right amount of chagrin. Though our interior guards would have reported any unauthorized personnel, the blind spot is in camera coverage, not physical security. Guards can be bribed, cameras can't. Jinho set down the tablet. Malik immediately grabbed it, smearing fingerprints across the screen with a kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for destroying expensive things. Who has access to the maintenance logs? Myself, the head of security, and the IT department. 3 people total. Siok watched Malik try to bite the tablet's corner. Though the logs themselves are stored on our central server, anyone with administrative credentials could theoretically view them. Jinho said nothing. He was watching Siok watch Malik, and there was something in the lieutenant's expression that didn't quite match the concerned advisor performance he was giving. Something hungry, something calculating. Malik, apparently bored with the tablet, tossed it aside and slithered out of Jinho's lap. He dropped to the floor and immediately crawled under the desk, which had become his favorite location in the compound. Jinho let him go. If a baby wanted to play in the one spot in Seoul where men came to receive death sentences, who was he to argue with natural selection? I've also taken the liberty, Siok continued, of reviewing the household staff files, specifically the debt contracts. There are currently 7 employees working to pay off loans arranged through various intermediaries. I thought you should know, given recent events, who else in this compound might pose a security risk. Jinho's hand stilled on the armrest. Define security risk. People in debt are vulnerable to external pressure, blackmail, coercion, bribery. Siok pulled out a physical folder this time, sliding it across the desk. I'm not suggesting we terminate their contracts, but perhaps relocating them to positions with less access to sensitive areas would be prudent. The folder was thin. Jinho opened it. 7 names, 7 photographs, 7 debt amounts ranging from 20 million won to 60. 5 of them were women. 2 had children. Denise Albright was the 3rd name on the list, her photo a grainy security capture that made her look even more exhausted than she did in person. Who arranged these loans? Jinho asked, his voice carefully neutral. Various sources, some through our usual contractors, some through independent operators. I've noted the creditors in the file. Siok's tone was helpful, informative, the kind of voice you'd use to discuss quarterly earnings rather than human collateral. Though I should mention that most of these debts were structured with unfavorable terms, high interest, aggressive collection practices, not the kind of arrangements I would have approved if I'd known about them beforehand. Under the desk, Malik had found something. Jinho heard the small grunt of effort, the sound of something being pulled. He was about to look when Siok spoke again. I'm particularly concerned about the Albright woman. Her debt is held by Cho Di-young, and Cho has a reputation for creative problem-solving when people can't pay. Having her in close proximity to you, especially with a child who now has unrestricted access to your private quarters. Siok let the sentence hang, pregnant with implication. Jinho looked at him, really looked. Siok held the gaze, his expression open, concerned, the face of a loyal advisor worried about his boss's safety. It was a good performance, almost good enough. You think she's a plant, Jinho said. I think she's desperate. Desperate people make unpredictable choices. Siok shifted forward slightly, his voice dropping into the register of confidential advice. I'm not saying she's intentionally working against you, but if Cho wanted to use her to gather intelligence, to map your routines, to identify vulnerabilities, she'd be in the perfect position, close enough to observe, forgettable enough to overlook. Under the desk, Malik made a triumphant noise. Jinho heard something tear, fabric maybe, or carpet fiber. He should probably check. He didn't. And you're bringing this to my attention now because... Because her son just demonstrated that our security has holes we didn't know about, which means she's been studying our systems, consciously or not. Siak's smile was gentle, sympathetic. I'm not your enemy here, boss. I'm trying to protect you. If that means asking uncomfortable questions about people you've developed a fondness for, then that's a burden I'm willing to carry. The word fondness hung in the air like a thrown blade. Jinho leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You think I've developed a fondness for the maid. I think you've allowed her child unprecedented access to your personal space. I think you've moved them into the guest wing, which is closer to your quarters than any of your actual security personnel. I think, Siak paused, choosing his words. I think you're making decisions with your heart instead of your head, and in our business, that's how good men die. It was almost touching, really. The concern, the loyalty, the way Siak was positioning himself as the rational voice, the steady hand, the one person brave enough to tell Jinho the truth. Under the desk, Malik had gone quiet. That was usually a bad sign. Jinho pushed his chair back slightly, angling to see what destruction his newest security threat was causing. Malik sat cross-legged under the desk, holding something small and black in one hand. In the other hand, he held a thread, burgundy, the same color as the Persian rug. He was pulling the thread, watching with fascination as it unraveled from a tiny hole in the carpet that shouldn't have been there. Jinho went very still. The black object was smaller than a coin, rectangular, with a wire antenna barely visible against Malik's palm. It was the kind of device you could buy from a dozen manufacturers, standard commercial surveillance equipment, the type that transmitted audio to a receiver within half a kilometer. The type that Lieutenant Siak's personal security company happened to install for corporate clients. Jinho's hand moved slowly, carefully, reaching under the desk. Malik looked up at him and smiled, holding out the device like a prize. Jinho took it, his fingers closing around the bug with exactly enough pressure to avoid triggering any tamper sensors it might have. He set it on the desk between himself and Siak. The lieutenant's expression didn't change, not immediately, but Jinho watched the microtells, the ones you learned to read when your life depended on knowing when someone was about to put a knife in your back. The slight widening of the pupils, the fractional tension in the jaw, the way Siak's breathing pattern shifted from relaxed to controlled. Boss, Siak said slowly, is that a listening device? Jinho's voice was perfectly calm, perfectly level, the kind of calm that preceded volcanic eruptions. The kind that was hidden under my desk, in my private office, where I conduct business that could get me sentenced to life in prison or executed depending on which prosecutor I piss off this week. He turned the device over, examining it with the clinical interest of someone identifying the murder weapon. It's interesting. The placement, I mean. Whoever installed it had to have access to this room, had to know the exact layout, had to be able to spend enough time under this desk to cut through the carpet backing, embed the device, and conceal the installation point. His eyes lifted to Siak. It's almost like they'd been in here before, many times, sitting exactly where you're sitting now. Siak's smile was still in place, but it had calcified into something rigid. Boss, I understand how this looks, but... Do you? Jinho stood. Malik, sensing something shift in the air, crawled out from under the desk and grabbed Jinho's leg, pulling himself up with the determination of someone who decided this was the safest place to be. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my most trusted lieutenant has been recording every conversation I've had in this room for the last 7 months. Every deal, every confession, every moment when I thought I was speaking to someone I could trust. That's not mine. Siak stood as well, his hands open, placating. Boss, I swear to you, I have no idea how that got there. But think about it. Would I really bring you a security report about vulnerabilities if I was the one exploiting them? Would I draw your attention to the very systems I'd compromised? It was a good point. It would have been a great point if Jinho hadn't spent the last 15 years learning that the best liars were the ones who told you the truth while hiding the knife. You would, Jinho said quietly, if you thought someone else was about to discover it first. If you thought a baby crawling around under my desk might accidentally find what you'd hidden. If you wanted to control the narrative before the evidence controlled it for you. He picked up the bug, holding it between thumb and forefinger like something diseased. This is the surveillance gap you found, isn't it? The 7-month blind spot. You didn't just discover it. You created it. You needed the cameras offline so you could install this without being recorded doing it. Boss, please, this is insane. Why would I betray you? Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you. Siak's voice carried exactly the right amount of wounded betrayal, the perfect pitch of a man falsely accused. If you want to investigate this, investigate it. Dust for prints, check the installation date, pull the transmission logs. I'll cooperate fully. But don't let paranoia destroy what we've built together based on a device that could have been planted by anyone. Malik tugged on Jinho's pant leg, demanding attention. Jinho looked down. The baby was holding up the burgundy thread, the one he'd pulled from the carpet. He was waving it like a flag, like he was trying to show Jinho something important. Jinho took the thread. It was high-quality wool, professionally dyed, the exact match for the custom rug that had been installed in this office 3 years ago. He turned it over in his fingers, his mind working through the implications. The rug had been a gift from Siak. A gesture of loyalty, Siak had said, to commemorate Jinho's 5th year leading the 7 Stars Syndicate. Jinho had accepted it because refusing gifts from your lieutenants sent the wrong message about trust. He looked at the spot where the thread had come from, the tiny hole Malik had found through nothing but persistent curiosity and the kind of luck that couldn't be manufactured. The bug had been sewn into the carpet backing during installation, which meant it had been there from the beginning, which meant Siak had been planning this for 3 years. Jinho set the thread on the desk next to the bug. Get out. Boss. I said get out. Jinho's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You have 12 hours to provide me with evidence that you didn't install this device. Physical evidence. Not explanations, not theories, not plausible deniability. I want security footage, purchase records, testimony from someone other than yourself. If you can't provide it, don't come back to this compound. Don't come back to Seoul. Don't come back to Korea. Siak's mask finally cracked. Underneath it was something cold and sharp and very, very angry. You're making a mistake. That woman and her child have been here less than a week, and you're already choosing them over someone who's bled for you, who's killed for you, who's built this empire with you. You built an empire for yourself, Jinho corrected. You just did it using my name. Now you have 12 hours to prove you haven't been stealing from me the entire time. I suggest you spend them wisely. Siak stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his tablet, his briefcase, his folder of debt contracts. He walked to the door, his posture rigid with barely controlled rage. At the threshold, he turned back. That baby is going to get you killed, he said. You're so obsessed with playing father to a child that isn't yours that you can't see the knife coming for your back. I can see it just fine, Jinho replied. I'm looking at the man holding it. Siak left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a cocked hammer. Jinho stood in the silence of his office, holding a listening device in one hand and a baby clinging to his other leg. He looked down at Malik, who was looking up at him with those wide, trusting eyes that didn't know enough to fear what was coming. You just started a war, Jinho told him. Malik giggled and held up his arms, demanding to be picked up. Jinho lifted him, settling the baby on his hip with a familiarity that should have felt foreign, but didn't. Malik immediately grabbed his collar, his small fingers finding the edge of the 7-star tattoo. Your mother thinks you're innocent, Jinho continued, his voice low. She thinks you're just a baby who doesn't understand what's happening, but I know better. You found that bug in under 5 minutes. You pulled exactly the right thread to expose it. That's not luck, that's instinct. He walked to the window, looking out over the compound. Somewhere in one of these buildings, Siak was probably already making phone calls, activating contingency plans, deciding whether to run or fight. Jinho hoped he'd fight. Running was boring. Here's what's going to happen, he told Malik, who was trying to eat his collar. Siak is going to realize he's been exposed. He's going to panic. And when he panics, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to reach out to people he thinks can protect him. He's going to activate assets he's been hiding. And we're going to watch him do it, and we're going to learn exactly how deep the rot goes in my organization. Malik yawned, completely unimpressed by the strategic analysis. You're a terrible listener, Jinho observed. But you're very good at finding things people want hidden, which makes you more useful than half my intelligence network. He carried Malik back to the play area, setting him down among the toys he refused to play with. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. It's me, he said when the line connected. I need surveillance on Lieutenant Siak. Everything. Who he calls, who he meets, where he goes. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and how long he spends in the bathroom. And I need it to start 5 minutes ago. He listened to the confirmation, then added, and pull the debt file on Denise Albright. I want to know who really owns that loan. Dig past the shell companies, past the intermediaries. I want the name of whoever's actually holding the contract. He ended the call and looked at Malik, who had abandoned the toys entirely and was crawling back toward the desk, drawn to the spot where he'd found the bug like a dog returning to where it had buried a bone. Your mother was right about one thing, Jinho said. You are just a baby. But in this compound, that makes you the most dangerous person here, because Bobbies don't play politics. They don't scheme. They just grab whatever looks interesting and pull until something breaks. Malik reached the desk and pulled himself up, looking at Jinho expectantly, waiting to be picked up again, waiting for Papa to keep him safe from a world that wanted to hurt him. Jinho picked him up, because that's what you did when something small and defenseless decided you were worth trusting, even when you knew better, even when you knew it would probably get you both killed. Welcome to the war, kid, he murmured. Try not to die before you learn to walk. Siak tried to bug the boss's own bedroom. Betrayal is a nasty business. If you think a snake like Siak deserves what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button to join the loyal side of the family. Jinho found her in the industrial laundry room on the basement level, a place he hadn't visited in the 3 years he'd owned this compound. He'd been looking for her for 20 minutes, checking the guest suite first, then the kitchen, then the staff quarters where she wasn't supposed to be anymore but might have returned out of habit or fear. He'd finally asked one of the kitchen workers, a woman in her 50s who'd looked at him like he'd grown a second head, when the butcher of Busen personally inquired about the location of a maid. The laundry room smelled like industrial detergent and steam. Massive commercial washers lined one wall, their doors hanging open like mouths. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with the kind of electrical problem that had probably been reported and ignored for months. It was hot down here, humid enough that Jinho felt sweat prickle at his collar within seconds of entering. Denise sat on the concrete floor between 2 dryers, her back against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. She was crying in the particular way people cried when they thought no one could hear them, silent, shoulders shaking, face buried in her arms. A basket of folded laundry sat beside her, the kind of high thread count sheets that went on beds in rooms worth more than her yearly salary. She'd been working. Even now, even in this state, she'd been working. Jinho stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. He should leave. He should send someone else to deal with this, someone whose job description included emotional labor and human resources. He should return to his office where Malik was currently being supervised by 2 armed guards who'd looked personally offended when Jinho had asked them to babysit, as if protecting a baby was beneath their pay grade. Instead, he stepped into the room. His shoes made no sound on the concrete, but Denise's head snapped up anyway, some survival instinct warning her she wasn't alone anymore. Her face went through a rapid evolution of expressions: surprise, terror, humiliation, and finally a desperate attempt at composure that would have been more convincing if she hadn't been visibly shaking. She scrambled to her feet so fast she nearly fell. "Boss, I'm sorry, I'm finishing the laundry rotation. I know I'm supposed to be upstairs, but the sheets needed." "Stop!" Jinho held up one hand. Denise's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence, her eyes wide and wet and fixed on him like he was a loaded gun pointed at her head. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not." "Don't lie to me." He took another step into the room, and she took a corresponding step back until her spine hit the dryer. "I don't care that you were crying. I care why you're lying about it, so I'll ask again. Why?" Denise's throat worked. She looked at the floor, at the walls, at the basket of laundry, anywhere but at him. Her hands twisted together in front of her stomach, knuckles white with pressure. "It's nothing, boss. Personal issues. It won't affect my work, I promise. Your son is currently in my office trying to eat a stapler under the supervision of men who have killed people for looking at me wrong. Your personal issues are already affecting my work." Jinho crossed his arms, leaning back against one of the washing machines. "Talk." She flinched at the command, but something in her expression shifted from terrified to exhausted, like she was too tired to maintain the performance of being fine. "I got a call, about an hour ago, from Mr. Cho." Jinho's attention sharpened. "Cho Di-young." "Yes." Denise's voice was barely audible over the hum of the machinery. "He wanted to know why I wasn't at my regular shift in the staff quarters. Someone told him I'd been moved to the guest wing. He said," her breath hitched, "he said that wasn't part of our arrangement, that if I was getting special treatment from you, it meant I had resources I hadn't disclosed, which meant I could afford to make larger payments on my debt." "How large?" "Triple starting next week." She laughed, a broken sound that had nothing to do with humor. "I'm paying him everything I earn now, everyone. I don't even get to keep enough for Malik's formula. I've been watering it down, stretching it, but if he triples the payment." She pressed her palms to her eyes, her whole body curling inward like she was trying to disappear. I can't pay triple. I can barely pay what I'm paying now." Jinho processed this information with the cold calculation he applied to all problems that threatened his interests. Cho was squeezing her, testing to see if Jinho's protection meant actual protection or just proximity. It was a power play, crude but effective. If Jinho let it stand, it would signal that his word meant nothing. If he intervened, it would confirm that Denise mattered to him, which would make her a permanent target. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd find a way, that I'd make the payments." Denise lowered her hands, her face blotchy and swollen. "What else could I say? If I refuse, he'll take Malik. That's what he said. He said debts can be paid in different ways. That a healthy baby boy could be placed with a family who'd pay off my loan in exchange for—" She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jinho didn't move, didn't react, but something in his stillness must have communicated the violence building behind his expression, because Denise took another step back even though there was nowhere left to go. "He threatened to sell your son." Jinho's voice was very quiet, very precise. "To human traffickers, to settle a debt that he himself originated." "It's legal. The contract I signed, it has clauses about alternative payment methods if I default. My lawyer, the free one from legal aid, said it would hold up in court if he—" "I don't care if it's legal." Jinho pushed off the washing machine, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. Denise pressed herself against the dryer, but he stopped just short of crowding her, his hands braced on either side of her shoulders, caging her without touching. "I care that a man who works in my organization is running a predatory lending operation that threatens children. I care that he's using my compound, my employment, my name as leverage to extract money from people who have nothing. Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head, mute with fear. "It means he's staining my honor." Jinho's jaw was so tight he could barely get the words out. "Every yakuza, every triad, every syndicate in Asia knows that the 7 stars don't profit from human trafficking. We don't touch drugs, we don't touch children, we don't touch slavery. That's the line. That's what separates us from animals. And Cho is using my protection, my territory, to run an operation that crosses every single one of those lines." He pushed away from the dryer, packing the small space like a caged predator. His mind was already working through the implications, the connections, the web of corruption that had to exist for Cho to operate this openly. Loan sharking wasn't new. Half the businesses in Seoul had some connection to informal lending networks. But this targeting employees, threatening children, operating inside Jinho's own compound. This was brazen. This required either stupidity or protection. Jinho didn't employ stupid people. How many others? He asked, turning back to Denise. What? How many other people in this compound are in debt to Cho, or to loan sharks connected to him? I don't know, boss. We don't talk about it. It's shameful, but... She hesitated, then continued in a rush. There's a woman in the kitchen, Mrs. Han. She works doubles every day. And one of the guards, the young one who works nights. I've seen him with bruises. And the woman who cleans the third floor, she has a daughter who needs medical treatments. They all have that same look, that desperate look. 7 people. Siak's security report had listed 7 employees with outstanding debts. All of them working in the compound, all of them in positions that required background checks and security clearance, all of them vulnerable to exactly the kind of pressure Cho was applying to Denise. 7 people who could be blackmailed, coerced, turned into informants or worse. Jinho pulled out his phone and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. I need every file we have on Cho De-young's lending operations. Client lists, contract templates, collection records, enforcement personnel. Everything. I also need the corporate registration for whatever shell company he's operating through, and I need to know who signed off on his business license. He listened for a moment, then said, I don't care if it takes all night. This is priority 1. And send someone to collect Denise Albright's debt contract from Cho's office. If he refuses to hand it over, encourage him. Creatively. He ended the call and looked at Denise, who was staring at him like he'd just performed a magic trick she didn't understand. What did you just do? She whispered. I'm auditing your loan. Jinho pocketed his phone. If Cho is operating legally, his contracts will have proper documentation, fair interest rates, and legal collection procedures. If he's not, Jinho's smile was the kind that made grown men reconsider their life choices. Then he's committed fraud against multiple residents of my compound, which makes it my business to correct. Boss, you can't. He'll know I told you. He'll do nothing. Jinho cut her off. Because by this time tomorrow, Cho won't be in a position to threaten anyone, and neither will whoever gave him permission to operate in my territory. Denise's face had gone pale. You're going to kill him. I'm going to ruin him, Jinho corrected. Death is quick. Ruin lasts. By the time I'm done, Cho will wish I'd just put a bullet in his head. Instead, he'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing that he had everything and lost it because he got greedy. He watched her process this, saw the moment she understood that her confession hadn't just put Cho in danger. It had lit a fuse that would burn through Jinho's entire organization until it found whoever had been protecting Cho's operation. You think Lieutenant Siak is involved, she said. It wasn't a question. I know he is. Jinho pulled up his phone again, showing her the photo he'd taken of the debt report Siak had provided. Your name is on a list he gave me this morning. 7 employees, all in debt, all working in sensitive positions. He presented it as a security concern. What he actually did was provide me with a catalog of everyone he's been using as leverage. Denise's hand flew to her mouth. The others, if you go after Cho, Siak will know they talked. He'll panic. Jinho's smile widened. And when he panics, he'll make mistakes. He'll try to silence witnesses, move money, contact his partners. Every action he takes will give me more evidence, more names, more connections. He put the phone away. Cho threatening your son wasn't just evil. It was stupid. It gave me the excuse I needed to dismantle the entire operation without looking like I'm purging my own organization out of paranoia. I don't understand. Why do you need an excuse? You're the boss. Because I can't rule through fear alone. Jinho began packing again, his hands clasped behind his back. Fear works until it doesn't. The moment my men think I'm killing people randomly, they'll band together to kill me first. That's how every empire falls, from the inside, when the emperor loses the support of his generals. But if I'm cleaning house because my honor was stained, because someone crossed a line I've made clear we don't cross, then I'm not paranoid. I'm principled. And men will follow principle, even when they won't follow fear. He stopped in front of her, and his expression softened fractionally, not enough to be kind, but enough to be something other than terrifying. Your son found Siok's listening device. You gave me evidence of his lone sharking operation. Between the two of you, you've handed me everything I need to cut out the rot in my organization without destroying the structure. So stop apologizing. You're not a liability. You're an asset. Denise looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. I'm a maid who couldn't control her baby. You're a mother who walked into a crime lord's office and survived. That takes either tremendous courage or tremendous stupidity, and I'm starting to think it's the former. Jinho offered her his hand, a gesture so foreign to their dynamic that she stared at it for 3 full seconds before understanding what he wanted. She took his hand. He pulled her away from the dryer, steadying her when her legs wobbled from sitting too long on concrete. The debt is void as of now, he said. Whatever you owed Cho, it's gone. I'm buying out the contract and then I'm burning it. You work for me directly now. Same hours, triple the pay, and your son gets his formula at full strength. Boss, I can't accept. It's not charity, it's strategy. Jinho released her hand. Siok is going to come after you when he realizes you're the reason I found out about Cho. Having you protected, well-fed, and financially stable removes his most obvious leverage point. It also sends a message to everyone else Cho has been bleeding dry. Cross me and you lose everything. Serve me loyally and I protect what's yours. He turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing. That call you got from Cho, did he call your personal phone or the compound line? My personal phone, the one I bought before I came here. Good, keep it. Let him call again. Record everything he says. I want documentation of every threat, every demand, every word that can be used against him in court. Jinho's smile was sharp enough to cut. Because I'm not just going to ruin him financially. I'm going to make sure he goes to prison. Real prison, not the kind you can buy your way out of. The kind where owing money to the wrong people gets you killed in the showers. Denise nodded slowly, her mind clearly struggling to keep up with how quickly her world had just transformed. Boss, she said as he reached the door, why are you doing this? Really? It's not just about honor, is it? Jinho paused, his back to her. He thought about Malik trying to eat a stapler under the supervision of killers. Thought about the way the baby had found the bug through nothing but curiosity and persistence. Thought about Denise, working 16-hour days and watering down formula to keep her son alive. I built this organization on the principle that we're better than the animals who run the other syndicates, he said finally. We don't prey on the weak. We don't profit from suffering. We don't break the people we're supposed to protect. If I let Cho threaten your son and do nothing, then I'm no different from every other monster in Seoul. And if I'm no different from them. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Then what's the point of being king? He left her standing in the laundry room, surrounded by clean sheets that smelled like lavender and bleach, and climbed the stairs back to his office, where a baby who couldn't walk yet was dismantling his empire one sticky fingerprint at a time. When he opened the door, Malik looked up from the stapler he'd successfully pried apart and smiled like Jinho was the best thing he'd seen all day. Papa. Jinho picked him up, ignoring the guard's poorly concealed relief at being released from childcare duty. Your mother just gave me the ammunition I needed to start a war, he told Malik. You should probably thank her later, assuming we both survive it. Malik grabbed his tie and tried to put it in his mouth. Jinho let him, because sometimes survival meant choosing which battles to fight, and right now, he had bigger problems than a baby with oral fixation. He had a lieutenant to destroy and an empire to purge. The tie was a small price to pay. Cho Di-young operated out of a third-floor office in Gangnam, the kind of building that tried to look legitimate with marble floors and potted plants, but couldn't quite hide the smell of desperation that clung to the walls. The directory in the lobby listed him as CDJ Financial Consulting Services, sandwiched between a plastic surgery clinic and a tax preparation service. Jinho had researched the location during the car ride over, reading through files his intelligence team had compiled in the 6 hours since he'd ordered the audit. Cho owned the building, all 4 floors. The consulting service was just the storefront. The real business happened in the basement, where the soundproofing was better and the exits were fewer. Jinho sat in the back of the sedan, Malik on his lap attempting to destroy a very expensive leather briefcase. Denise sat beside him, rigid with tension, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't wanted to come. Had begged, actually, with the kind of quiet desperation that suggested she knew exactly what was about to happen and wanted no part of it. Jinho had brought her anyway, because this wasn't about the dead anymore. This was about making a statement, and statements required witnesses. "We don't have to do this," Denise said for the 3rd time since they'd left the compound. Her voice was barely audible over the engine. "You said the contract was void. We could just leave, never contact him again. He'd move on to easier targets. He'd move on to the next person on his list." Jinho didn't look at her. He was watching the building, counting exits, cataloging security cameras, mapping escape routes with the automatic precision of someone who'd spent 20 years assuming every room he entered might become his tomb. The woman in the kitchen, the guard with the bruises, the mother with the sick daughter, all the people you mentioned, they'd still be trapped. Still be bleeding money to a parasite who threatened to sell children when the math stopped working in his favor. That's not your problem to fix. It became my problem when he did it in my territory. Jinho shifted Malik to his other knee. The baby had given up on the briefcase and was now fascinated by the window, pressing his face against the glass and leaving smudges that would horrify the driver later. This compound, this district, these streets, they operate under my protection. That means something. It's supposed to mean something. And if I let Cho violate that protection without consequences, then the protection becomes meaningless. The car pulled up to the curb. The driver, one of Jinho's personal security, a man named T who'd been with him since Busan, put the vehicle in park and looked at Jinho in the rearview mirror. "How do you want to handle this, boss?" "Quiet for now, but keep the engine running." Jinho handed Malik to Denise, ignoring the way the baby immediately started to protest. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes or if you hear gunshots, you leave. Take them back to the compound. Don't wait for me." T nodded once, his expression unreadable. He'd heard this kind of instruction before. Sometimes Jinho came back. Sometimes other people came back to report that he wouldn't be coming back. The fact that T was still driving him after 8 years meant the odds had historically favored Jinho's survival. Jinho stepped out of the sedan. The November air was cold enough to sting, the kind of cold that made Seoul feel like a city carved from ice and ambition. He adjusted his coat, cashmere, dark gray, expensive enough to communicate status without being ostentatious, and started toward the building entrance. Behind him, he heard the car door open again. He turned. Denise stood on the sidewalk, Malik balanced on her hip, her expression set with the kind of stubborn determination that suggested she'd made a decision and no amount of logic would unmake it. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." She walked toward him, her cheap shoes clicking against the pavement. "You said this was about making a statement. Fine, let me be part of the statement. Let him see that I'm not afraid of him anymore." "You should be afraid of him." Jinho stepped into her path, blocking her advance. "You should be terrified, because what I'm about to do in that office isn't going to be clean. It's not going to be civilized, and you don't need that in your head for the rest of your life. I've spent 6 months watching my son cry himself to sleep because we couldn't afford enough food. I've spent 6 months answering phone calls from a man who described, in detail, what would happen to Malik if I missed a single payment. I've spent 6 months living in fear." Denise's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. "So whatever you're about to do, I can handle it, and I want to watch." Jinho studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and turned toward the building. They rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence. Malik had gone quiet, picking up on the tension the way children did, his small hand fisted in Denise's collar. The elevator dinged. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and broken dreams. CDJ Financial Consulting Services occupied Suite 304. The door was solid wood with frosted glass, the kind of door that suggested privacy and professionalism. Jinho tested the handle. Locked. He knocked twice. A voice from inside, male, young, probably a secretary or low-level enforcer, called out in Korean, "We're by appointment only. Come back tomorrow." Jinho knocked again, harder. "I said we're closed." The door opened. A man in his 20s, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, stood in the doorway with an expression of professional annoyance that evaporated the moment he saw Jinho's face. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened. No sound came out. "I need to see Cho," Jinho said pleasantly. "It's about a debt." The man stepped aside so fast, he nearly tripped over his own feet. The office interior was exactly what Jinho had expected. Cheap furniture trying to look expensive. Motivational posters on the walls about success and perseverance, the kind of ironic decor that looked different when you knew the business model involved threatening bobbies. A reception desk manned by the stammering secretary. And behind that, a closed door with Cho's name on a brass placard. Jinho walked past the desk without breaking stride. The secretary made a sound of protest, then thought better of it when Jinho turned his head fractionally in his direction. The man sat back down, picked up his phone, and very deliberately looked at the ceiling. Jinho opened Cho's door without knocking. Cho Di-young sat behind a desk that was trying too hard, all glass and chrome, the kind of furniture that appeared in catalogs aimed at people who wanted to look wealthy without understanding what wealth actually looked like. He was in his 40s, well-groomed, wearing a watch that cost more than the building was worth. He looked up from his computer with the expression of a man interrupted during important work, his mouth already forming words of dismissal. Then he saw Jinho. The words died. His face went through a rapid evolution of expressions that would have been funny if the situation weren't about to turn violent. "Mr. Guan," Cho stood, his smile snapping into place with the automatic reflexes of a professional liar. "This is unexpected. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled." "We don't." Jinho stepped into the office. Denise followed, closing the door behind her. Cho's eyes tracked to her, then to Malik, and something in his expression sharpened with understanding and calculation. "Ah, Mrs. Albright, what a pleasant surprise. Have you come to make your payment? Though I must say, bringing Mr. Guan seems somewhat excessive for a routine transaction." "I'm not here to make a payment." Denise's voice shook slightly, but she held her ground. "I'm here to watch you explain to the Butcher of Busan why you threatened to sell my son to human traffickers." Cho's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went dead. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Our contracts are completely legal. All collection procedures follow proper." Jinho moved. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, grabbed Cho by his expensive tie, and slammed him face first into the glass desk hard enough to spiderweb the surface. Cho's nose made a wet cracking sound. Blood sprayed across the chrome edge, bright red against polished metal. "Let's try this again," Jinho said conversationally, not releasing his grip. "And this time, don't insult my intelligence by pretending you run a legitimate business. You're a lone shark. You prey on desperate people. You use my compound, my employment structure, my name as leverage to extract money from workers who have nowhere else to turn. And when they can't pay, you threaten their children." He lifted Cho's head and slammed it down again. The glass cracked further. Cho made a sound that might have been a protest or might have been a plea. Jinho didn't care which. "Do you know what happens to people who stain my honor?" Jinho asked. He was still using that same pleasant, conversational tone, like they were discussing quarterly earnings. "They disappear. Not quickly. Not cleanly. They disappear in pieces over weeks until everyone who knew them understands exactly what happens when you make me look like a hypocrite." He released Cho's tie. The lone shark slumped in his chair, blood pouring from his ruined nose, his hands shaking as they rose to his face. "Please," Cho gasped through damaged cartilage. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't realize she was under your protection." "She wasn't. Not then. That's the problem. Jinho walked around the desk, scanning the office with the practiced eye of someone cataloging evidence. You saw a woman with a baby and no options, and you created a contract designed to trap her permanently. 50 million won at 15% monthly interest. Do you know how long it would take her to pay that off on a maid's salary? I don't. 43 years. Jinho opened a filing cabinet, rifling through folders with casual violence. I had my accountant run the numbers. 43 years of payments before the principal was cleared, assuming she never missed a single payment and the interest rate never increased. Which it would have, wouldn't it? Because that's how this works. You keep them bleeding just enough to stay alive, but never enough to escape. He found what he was looking for, a ledger physical, not digital, the kind of record-keeping that avoided electronic trails. He flipped it open, scanning the entries. Names, dates, amounts, all written in neat columns that documented systematic exploitation with accounting precision. 7 names he recognized from the compound. Dozens more he didn't. How many? Jinho asked, still reading. How many what? Cho's voice was muffled by the hands pressed to his face, trying to stem the bleeding. How many people are you bleeding in my territory? In buildings I own, businesses I protect, districts that operate under my name. Jinho looked up from the ledger. I count 47 entries in this book alone. 47 people trapped in contracts designed to never end. How many of them have children you've threatened? Cho said nothing. That was answer enough. Jinho closed the ledger. Then he walked to the small kitchenette in the corner of the office. Because of course Cho had a kitchenette, because men who made money from suffering liked their coffee fresh, and pulled open drawers until he found what he needed. Matches. A box of long wooden matches, the kind you used to light fancy candles. He returned to the desk, set the ledger on the cracked glass surface, and struck a match. No, Cho lunged forward. Jinho caught him by the throat with his free hand, slamming him back into his chair hard enough to make it roll backward into the wall. That ledger represents years of work, Cho wheezed. Hundreds of contracts, millions of won, you can't just... I'm not just destroying your ledger. Jinho dropped the match. The flame caught on the paper, spreading quickly, consuming names and numbers and evidence of systematic cruelty. I'm destroying your business. By tomorrow morning, every single person in this book will receive notification that their debt has been purchased by a new creditor. Me. And I'm canceling every single contract, writing off everyone, releasing every person you've trapped. The fire spread, black smoke rising toward the ceiling. A smoke detector began to wail. Cho watched his life's work burn with an expression of absolute devastation. You're insane, he whispered. Do you have any idea how much money you're throwing away? Those contracts are worth. Nothing. Jinho released Cho's throat. They're worth nothing because they were built on a business model I don't allow in my territory. You knew that. Every operator in Seoul knows the 7 stars don't traffic in human misery. We don't deal drugs, we don't sell children, we don't run slavery operations disguised as lending services. That's the line. That's always been the line. He pulled out his phone, snapped a photo of the burning ledger, then sent it to 3 different numbers with the message. Clean sweep. All contracts void. Find the people and tell them they're free. Cho was crying now, watching smoke billow from the remains of his records. Lieutenant Siak will hear about this. He approved my operations. He gave me permission to. Lieutenant Siak is why you're still breathing. Jinho pocketed his phone. If you were operating independently, I'd kill you. Right here, right now, and your secretary would spend the rest of his life wondering if he should have called the police when he had the chance. But you're not independent. You're a symptom, which makes you useful. He leaned down, bringing his face level with Cho's. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to run. Tonight. You're going to take whatever money you have in accounts that aren't connected to Siak, and you're going to leave Seoul. Leave Korea if you're smart. And if you ever come back, if you ever contact anyone in that ledger, if you ever operate another lending scheme in any territory connected to the 7 stars, I will finish what I started today. Do you understand? Cho nodded frantically, blood and tears mixing on his face. Jinho straightened, adjusting his coat. The fire was dying now, the ledger reduced to ash and curling paper. He turned to Denise, who stood by the door with Malik pressed against her shoulder. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but she wasn't looking away. "Are you satisfied?" he asked her. She looked at Cho, broken and bleeding in his expensive chair. Looked at the ashes of the contracts that had controlled her life for 6 months. Looked at Jinho, who had just committed arson and assault on her behalf without blinking. "Yes," she said, her voice was steady. "I'm satisfied." Jinho nodded. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back at Cho one final time. "One more thing. Denise Albright and her son are under my personal protection now. Not my employment. My protection. That means they're not staff. They're mine. If you tell anyone what happened here, if you breathe a word about this conversation to Siak or anyone else, I will consider it a declaration of war against my property. And wars against my property end with funerals." He opened the door. The secretary was gone, the reception area empty. Smart boy. Jinho led Denise and Malik to the elevator, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, a gesture that looked protective but felt like a brand. In the elevator, Denise finally spoke. "You called me your property." "I did. I'm not sure how I feel about that." Jinho looked down at Malik, who had recovered his energy and was trying to press all the elevator buttons at once. "Property of the Butcher of Busan is safer than being employed by the Butcher of Busan. Employees can be fired. Property is protected. It's a legal distinction, but in our world, legal distinctions are the difference between living and dying. It also means I can't leave. It means you won't want to." Jinho caught Malik's hand before he could hit the emergency stop button. "Because the alternative is going back to a world where men like Cho can threaten your son and you have no recourse. Where you're alone, unprotected, vulnerable, I'm offering you safety. It comes with constraints, but safety always does." The elevator doors opened. T was waiting by the car, his expression carefully neutral when he saw Denise. He opened the back door, and Jinho guided her inside before sliding in beside her. As the car pulled away from the building, Denise looked back through the rear window. Smoke was starting to seep from a third-floor window. "You really burned it," she said. "I really burned it. Siak is going to know. When Cho runs, when the contracts are voided, Siak will know you found out." "Yes," Jinho settled Malik on his lap. The baby yawned, exhausted by the adventure, and laid his head on Jinho's chest. "And when he knows, he'll panic. And when he panics, he'll make mistakes, and I'll be waiting." Denise turned to face forward, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did for Malik." "Don't thank me." Jinho's voice was tired. "I didn't do it to be kind. I did it because Cho made me look weak, and weak is how you die in this business. You and Malik just happened to benefit from my need to project strength." But his hand, resting on Malik's back in a gesture that had become automatic, suggested the explanation wasn't entirely true. Denise didn't argue. She just nodded and looked out the window at Seoul sliding past, a city full of predators and prey. She wasn't sure which category she belonged to anymore. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was safer now than she'd been in months. Even if that safety came with a price, she hadn't finished calculating. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the compound's main building, a space Jinho had designed 7 years ago with the specific intention of creating a fortress that felt like a tomb. Everything was sharp angles and cold surfaces, marble floors that echoed footsteps, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Seoul, but felt more like exposure than luxury, furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable because comfort bred complacency. The color palette was monochrome: black, gray, white, the occasional slash of deep red that looked like dried blood in certain lighting. It was a space designed by someone who expected to die violently and wanted to make sure the cleanup would be easy. Now Jinho stood in the center of his living room at 6 a.m, watching a team of his men empty the gun cabinet with expressions that suggested they'd collectively lost a bet. Everything above 6 feet, Jinho instructed, gesturing to the built-in shelving that ran along the western wall. Pistols, rifles, ammunition, cleaning kits. If it can fire, cut, or explode, it goes up where small hands can't reach. T, who'd been summoned from his apartment at 5:30 with instructions that had made him question his boss's sanity, carefully removed a Heckler & Koch MP5 from its display mount and handed it to another guard. "Boss, respectfully, this is a lot of reconfiguration for a temporary situation. The guest suite downstairs has adequate security. Wouldn't it make more sense to?" The guest suite has a door that locks from the outside and windows that face the south garden, which has 17 different sight lines from adjacent buildings. Jinho picked up a combat knife from the coffee table, a table that, until this morning, had been covered in weapons magazines and demolition equipment schematics. If someone wanted to breach that room, they could do it in under 4 minutes. Up here, there's only one access point, and it's monitored by cameras I personally installed. T absorbed this information with the stoic patience of someone who'd learned not to question the boss's paranoia. "You're expecting an attack." "I'm expecting Lieutenant Siak to realize he's been exposed and make a desperate play for survival. Desperate men do stupid things. Stupid things include sending hitmen to kill the woman and child who cost them everything." Jinho set down the knife on a high shelf, well above even his own reaching height. "So yes, they're moving up here, where I can see the threat coming." "You're putting them in your personal space." T said this like he was diagnosing a medical condition. "In your private quarters, where you sleep." "I'm aware of the architectural layout of my own home." "Boss," T set down the rifle he'd been holding and turned to face Jinho directly, which was either very brave or very stupid. "You've lived here for 7 years. In that time, I've never seen you bring anyone to this floor except people you were about to kill. You don't have guests. You don't have overnight visitors. You barely sleep here yourself. Half the time you crash in your office because you don't trust being unconscious in a location that can't be sealed from the inside. And now you're converting your guest room into a nursery for a baby who isn't yours." Jinho met his gaze with the flat, empty expression that made people remember why they were afraid of him. "Do you have a point, or are you just reciting facts I already know?" "My point is that this is a significant change in your security protocol, and changes like this create vulnerabilities." T's voice was careful, professional, stripped of any emotion that might be interpreted as judgment. "If you're going to protect them, there are better ways. Safe houses. Secure locations outside Seoul. Hell, we could move them to the Busan facility where they'd be alone, unmonitored, dependent on soldiers I trust less than the ones here." Jinho walked to the windows, looking out over the city as it woke up under the November dawn. "The baby found Siak's listening device in under 5 minutes. His mother gave me evidence of a lone sharking operation I didn't know existed. Together, they've exposed corruption I've been sitting on top of for months without realizing. So forgive me if I've decided that the two people who actually seem invested in keeping me alive deserve to be somewhere. I can keep them alive in return." T said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded once and returned to disassembling the gun cabinet. The reconfiguration took 3 hours. Weapons were moved to high shelves and locked cabinets that required thumbprint access. The coffee table, which had been solid steel and sharp-cornered enough to crack skulls in a fight, was replaced with something rounded and padded that Jinho suspected was meant for actual coffee rather than tactical defense. The floor-to-ceiling windows received a second layer of ballistic glass and blackout curtains that could be deployed with the press of a button. Every electrical outlet below 4 feet was covered with plastic safety caps that one of the guards had to emergency order from a baby supply store, returning with a bag full of outlet covers and an expression of existential confusion. By 9 a.m., the living room looked like a weapons-free zone designed by someone who'd read about child safety in a manual, but had never actually seen a child. Jinho stood in the middle of it, surveying the changes with the critical eye of someone inspecting fortifications. It looked wrong, too soft, too exposed, too much like a place where people actually lived rather than waited to die. "It's adequate," he said finally. T, who'd spent the last hour installing cabinet locks, made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been suppressed laughter. The nursery was worse. The guest room had been Spartan by design. A bed, a nightstand, blackout curtains. Jinho had used it exactly twice in 7 years, both times when the bullet wound in his shoulder had made the trip down to his office seem inadvisable. Now it needed to become something else entirely, and Jinho's understanding of what Bobby's required was largely theoretical and definitely insufficient. He'd ordered supplies. The procurement team had delivered them at dawn. Their faces carefully blank as they'd carried in a crib, a changing table, a rocking chair, and approximately 7,000 other items that Jinho couldn't identify but assumed were necessary. There were blankets in colors he didn't have names for, stuffed animals that served no tactical purpose, a mobile that hung over the crib and played music that made Jinho want to shoot something. He stood in the doorway, staring at the chaos of soft things and bright colors, and wondered if this was what a stroke felt like. It looks like a toy store exploded, T observed from behind him. It looks like a security nightmare. Jinho pointed at the mobile. That thing makes noise, constant noise. How am I supposed to hear someone approaching with that playing? You could turn it off. Then what's the point of having it? T had no answer to that. By the time Denise and Malik arrived, escorted by 2 guards who looked relieved to hand off their charges, the penthouse had been transformed into something that existed in the uncanny valley between fortress and home. Jinho met them at the entrance, nodding the way Denise's eyes widened as she took in the space. "This is where you live?" she asked. "This is where I avoid being killed in my sleep." Jinho took Malik from her arms automatically, the motion now so practiced it didn't even register as unusual. "Your room is the second door on the right. The bathroom is stocked. There's a panic button by the bed, red, you can't miss it. If you press it, 6 armed men will be through that door in under 30 seconds. That's, Denise trailed off, still staring at the living room. That's comforting, I think. It's supposed to be. Jinho carried Malik toward the nursery, Denise following. When he opened the door and she saw what he'd done, what he'd tried to do, her hand flew to her mouth. You built him a nursery. I had a nursery built. I personally didn't construct anything. Jinho set Malik down in the crib, watching the baby immediately try to climb back out. Though I did approve the color scheme, the designer wanted yellow, I vetoed it, too visible from aerial surveillance. Denise walked into the room slowly, touching the rocking chair, the changing table, the mobile that played the annoying music. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. This is too much, she whispered. It's strategically sound. The crib is positioned away from the windows. The changing table has storage for supplies, so you're not making multiple trips to other rooms. The rocking chair faces the door so you can see threats approaching. Jinho picked Malik up again when the baby started to fuss. It's not generosity, it's logistics. It's the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me. Jinho didn't know what to do with that information, so he ignored it. I ordered food sent up. The kitchen has instructions to provide 3 meals daily plus snacks. If you need anything else, there's a phone by your bed. Dial 9 for household services. He carried Malik out of the nursery and into the kitchen, another space that had received modification. The knives moved to high drawers, the cleaning supplies relocated to a locked cabinet. A high chair had been installed at the breakfast bar, the kind with straps and buckles that suggested bobbies were flight risks. Jinho deposited Malik in the high chair with the careful precision of someone handling unstable explosives. The baby immediately started banging both hands on the tray, producing a rhythmic percussion that echoed off the marble counters. He's hungry, Denise said, moving past Jinho to the refrigerator. Let me just... Sit, Jinho pointed at the other breakfast bar stool. You've been up since 5 preparing for the move. I can handle feeding a baby. Denise looked at him like he'd just announced plans to perform open-heart surgery. Boss, have you ever fed a baby before? How complicated can it be? You put food on a spoon, you put the spoon in his mouth. You repeat until he stops being hungry. Jinho opened the refrigerator, scanning the contents. The kitchen staff had stocked it with baby-appropriate foods, each container labeled with preparation instructions in handwriting so neat it looked printed. He selected something that claimed to be organic sweet potato puree and grabbed a spoon from the drawer. Malik watched this process with the intensity of a general observing enemy troop movements. Jinho sat on the stool beside the high chair, opened the container, and loaded the spoon with an appropriate amount of orange substance. He held it up, examining it like ordnance. This looks like what we used to mix with concrete in Busan. It's sweet potato, Denise said. She was trying not to smile and failing. Bobbies like it. Bobbies have terrible taste. Jinho held the spoon toward Malik's mouth. All right, open. Malik stared at him, then at the spoon, then back at him. He did not open his mouth. I said open. Jinho moved the spoon closer. Malik turned his head to the side, a defensive maneuver that would have been more impressive if he weren't still drooling. You have to make it interesting, Denise offered from her stool. Pretend it's an airplane or a train, make sounds. Jinho looked at her with the expression of a man who'd just been asked to perform interpretive dance. Sounds. Like vroom or choo-choo, to make him want to eat it. I'm not making train sounds. Then he's not going to eat. Jinho looked at Malik, who was watching this exchange with what appeared to be smug satisfaction. This was a test. Everything was always a test. The baby was establishing dominance by refusing to cooperate, forcing Jinho to either give up or adapt. Jinho didn't give up. He adjusted his grip on the spoon, holding it the way he'd hold a combat knife, blade forward, controlled, ready to strike. This spoon contains nutrients essential for your survival. You're going to eat it. You're going to eat it because survival requires fuel, and fuel requires consumption. This is not negotiable. Malik blinked, then he leaned forward and opened his mouth. Jinho, surprised by the victory, successfully delivered the spoonful of sweet potato. Malik's face went through several expressions: surprise, consideration, acceptance. He swallowed. Huh, Jinho reloaded the spoon. Apparently directness works. Or he's just scared of you. Denise was definitely smiling now. He's not scared of me. If he were scared, he wouldn't have crawled into my office. Twice. Jinho delivered another spoonful. This time Malik grabbed at the spoon, trying to take control of the feeding process. Jinho held it just out of reach. No, you don't have the fine motor control for this operation. I maintain custody of the spoon until you demonstrate competence. He's a baby, not a soldier. He's a trainee. Everyone starts somewhere. Jinho delivered another spoonful, and this time Malik grabbed his wrist with both hands, trying to guide the spoon to his mouth faster. See, he's learning offensive tactics, using my own momentum against me. That's good instinct. That's just a hungry baby. Same principle. Jinho allowed Malik to help guide the next spoonful. Combat is about reading your opponent's intentions and exploiting their patterns. He's learned that if he grabs my wrist, he gets fed faster. That's strategic thinking. They continued like this, Jinho treating the feeding process like a training exercise, Malik gradually taking more control of the spoon until sweet potato covered both of them and the high chair and most of the surrounding counter space. By the time the container was empty, Malik had sweet potato in his hair, and Jinho's expensive shirt had an orange handprint over the pocket. Denise had stopped trying to hide her laughter. This is humiliating, Jinho said, looking at the disaster zone. I've negotiated treaties with Yakuza bosses that were cleaner than this. Welcome to parenthood. Denise stood, grabbing a towel from the counter. Let me clean him up before he decorates your entire kitchen. I can handle it. Jinho took the towel and began attempting to wipe Malik's face. The baby squirmed, treating the towel like an enemy combatant, grabbing it with both hands and trying to eat it. Stop that. This is not food. This is for removing food. Malik did not stop. He pulled the towel toward his mouth with determination that suggested he'd decided it was, in fact, food. You have to be firm, Jinho told him, engaging in what was essentially a tug-of-war with a baby over a piece of terry cloth. Boundaries are important. If I let you eat the towel, tomorrow you'll want to eat the curtains, and then where does it end? Papa, Malik said cheerfully, releasing the towel to grab Jinho's face with both sticky hands. Jinho froze. The baby's hands were on his cheeks, his small fingers pressing into the scar tissue that ran along his jaw. Malik was smiling at him with absolute trust, complete certainty that this man, this killer, this crime lord, this person whose hands had ended lives, would keep him safe. He loves you, Denise said softly. He doesn't know your reputation. He doesn't know what you've done. He just knows you feed him and hold him and keep him safe. And that's all he needs to know. Jinho carefully removed Malik's hands from his face, holding them gently. He's going to figure it out eventually. What I am, what I do. And when he does this, he gestured at the orange-covered kitchen, the nursery down the hall, the entire ridiculous domestic situation he'd constructed. All of this becomes a liability. Because you can't love someone and respect what they do when what they do is monstrous. Maybe, Denise moved closer, taking Malik from the high chair and settling him on her hip. Or maybe by the time he's old enough to understand, you'll have become someone different, someone who deserves that love. Jinho wanted to tell her that people like him didn't change, that the capacity for violence wasn't something you could unlearn, wasn't something that disappeared just because a baby called you Papa, that he would always be the butcher of Busan, no matter how many nurseries he built or how many sweet potato containers he emptied. Instead, he looked at the orange handprint on his shirt, proof that he'd spent the morning teaching a baby to eat, treating it like combat training, because that was the only framework he understood for teaching anything. He got more food on me than in him, Jinho observed. That's actually impressive for a first attempt. Denise headed toward the nursery. Most first-time feeders end up wearing the entire container. I maintained custody of 70% of the food. That's passing. That's parenting, boss. Jinho stood alone in his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of domesticity, and felt something shift in his chest. Something uncomfortable. Something that felt dangerously like hope. He looked at the orange handprint on his shirt and decided not to change it. Not yet. The formal dining room in the compound's west wing had been designed for exactly this kind of gathering. 12 seats around a table, carved from single piece of black walnut, walls paneled in dark wood that absorbed sound and made private conversations feel like confessions. Jinho sat at the head of the table in a chair that looked like a throne and felt like a target, watching his capos arrive one by one with the punctuality that fear instilled better than respect ever could. These dinners happened quarterly, a ritual Jinho had inherited from his predecessor and maintained because traditions gave structure to organizations that would otherwise collapse into chaos. Each capo represented a different revenue stream, a different territory, a different set of problems that needed managing. They came to report earnings, negotiate disputes, and demonstrate loyalty through the simple act of showing up and not trying to kill anyone. Usually. Tonight felt different. Tonight the air carried the electric charge that preceded storms, the kind of atmospheric pressure that made animals flee before the first thunderclap. Jinho had felt it the moment he'd entered the room, had seen it reflected in the faces of his men as they took their assigned seats. The careful neutrality, the way their eyes tracked to Lieutenant Siak at the far end of the table, the slight tension in shoulders that suggested everyone was waiting for something to break. Siak had arrived last, which was either a power play or a tactical error. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars, his hair perfectly styled, his smile fixed in place with the permanence of scar tissue. He'd bowed to Jinho, the gesture precise and empty, before taking his seat directly across from where Jinho would sit. Where Jinho would have sat if he'd been sitting alone. Instead, he'd walked into the dining room with Malik on his hip, the baby dressed in something Denise had called a romper that made him look like a small, formal businessman. The room had gone silent. 12 hardened criminals, men who'd built their fortunes on violence and intimidation, had collectively frozen at the sight of their boss carrying a baby to a syndicate dinner. Jinho had ignored their reactions with the ease of someone who'd stopped caring about appearing normal years ago. He'd settled into his chair, adjusted Malik on his lap so the baby faced the table, and gestured for the servers to begin. "Gentlemen," he'd said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "this is Malik. He'll be observing tonight. Please conduct yourselves accordingly." No one had argued. No one had questioned. They'd simply nodded and pretended that this was completely normal, because in Jinho's world, normal was whatever he decided it was. The first hour proceeded according to script. Each capo presented their quarterly reports, territory expansions, revenue projections, competitor activity. Jinho listened with half his attention while Malik played with a cloth napkin, wadding it into a ball and throwing it on the floor repeatedly. Each time it fell, one of the servers would retrieve it with the solemn dedication of someone handling a religious artifact. Each time it was returned, Malik would throw it again, delighted by this new game he'd invented. The capo managing the dock operations finished his report. The man handling construction contracts began his. Malik discovered that the silverware made interesting sounds when banged against the table, and Jinho had to intercept a fork before it could become a projectile weapon. "Revenue is up 18%, the construction capo was saying, his eyes occasionally flicking to the baby with barely concealed confusion. "The new highway project has been particularly profitable. We're on track to—" Malik lunged for the wine glass in front of Jinho. Jinho caught him with one hand, redirecting the grab toward a piece of bread instead. The construction capo paused, uncertain whether to continue. "Keep going," Jinho said, breaking the bread into smaller pieces that Malik could hold without choking. "You were saying something about the highway project." The reports continued. Jinho fed Malik pieces of bread and listened to his capos describe the machinery of his empire with the detached interest of someone who already knew what they were going to say before they said it. These dinners were theater, performance designed to maintain the illusion of democratic process in an organization that was fundamentally autocratic. The capos reported. Jinho approved or disapproved. Everyone pretended this was a negotiation rather than a briefing. The servers brought the main course, some kind of fish preparation that had probably cost a fortune and tasted like expensive nothing. Malik reached for Jinho's plate. Jinho moved it out of range and handed the baby another piece of bread. "Not yet," he told Malik quietly. "You're not ready for solid fish. Give it another year." Malik responded by grabbing Jinho's tie and trying to use it to pull himself into a standing position on Jinho's lap. This project lasted approximately 3 seconds before the baby lost his balance and fell backward. Jinho caught him, settled him back into position, and returned his attention to the capo currently droning on about shipping manifests. Lieutenant Siak hadn't spoken yet. He sat at the far end of the table, eating slowly, watching Jinho with the focused attention of a predator calculating distance and trajectory. His plate was barely touched. His wine glass remained full. He was waiting for something. The shipping manifest presentation concluded. The capo responsible for the entertainment district began his report. Malik had discovered that Jinho's watch was shiny and had devoted his entire attention to trying to remove it from Jinho's wrist. The watch was a Patek Philippe, worth more than a small car, and was currently being drooled on by a baby who had no concept of Swiss craftsmanship. Jinho let him play with it. The watch could be cleaned. Keeping Malik occupied was more valuable than preserving material possessions. The entertainment district report finished. The room fell into the customary pause that preceded the final presentation, always saved for the lieutenant, always the moment when Siak would summarize overall organizational performance and propose strategic initiatives for the coming quarter. Siak stood, his movements smooth and practiced. He picked up his wine glass, a crystal piece from the set Jinho's predecessor had commissioned, each glass worth more than the servers made in a month, and smiled at the assembled capos. "Before I begin my report," Siak said, his voice carrying the warm authority of someone addressing colleagues rather than subordinates. "I'd like to propose a toast." He raised his glass, the ruby liquid catching the candlelight. "To our continued prosperity, to the 7 Stars Syndicate, and to Boss Guan, whose leadership has brought us to heights our predecessors could only imagine." The other capos reached for their glasses. Jinho did not. He was watching Siak's face, reading the micro-expressions, the tiny tells that separated genuine emotion from performance. Siak's smile was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfect that required conscious effort to maintain. "Boss," Siak prompted, still holding his glass aloft, "will you join us?" Jinho reached for his wine glass with his free hand, the one not currently supporting Malik's weight. His fingers closed around the crystal stem. He began to lift it. Malik's hand shot out with the speed of a striking snake, hitting the glass from below. The wine glass flew upward, the trajectory wild and uncontrolled. Red wine arced through the air in a graceful parabola before splashing onto the antique carpet between Jinho's chair and Siak's position. The liquid hit the Persian weave and began to sizzle. The sound was quiet, barely audible over the sudden collective intake of breath from 12 men who just watched chemistry happen in real time. The wine, if it had ever been wine, was eating through the carpet fibers, bubbling and hissing like acid on flesh. Smoke rose from the spreading stain, thin and acrid, carrying the distinctive chemical smell of industrial solvent. The room had gone absolutely silent. Jinho looked at the carpet, looked at his wine glass, now empty in his hand, looked at Malik, who was staring at the smoking stain with the fascinated attention of a baby who discovered something interesting. Then he looked at Siak. The lieutenant's face had gone through several rapid transformations: surprise, calculation, fear, and finally settled on confused concern. "Boss, what just happened? Did someone tamper with the wine?" Jinho set down his empty glass with careful precision. The crystal made a small sound against the wood table, quiet as a cocked hammer. "An excellent question. Who prepared the wine tonight?" One of the servers, young, terrified, already calculating his life expectancy, stepped forward. "I did, boss. I opened the bottles myself. They came from the cellar from the reserve stock. I would never." "Calm down." Jinho's voice was perfectly level, perfectly calm, the kind of calm that preceded executions. "I'm not accusing you. I'm establishing chain of custody. You opened the bottles. Who selected which bottles to open?" The server swallowed hard. "Lieutenant Siak, boss. He said you wanted the 2005 Bordeaux. He said it was your favorite for formal dinners." "I don't have a favorite wine." Jinho adjusted Malik on his lap, the baby now attempting to grab the napkin again, completely uninterested in the adult drama unfolding around him. "I barely drink, which means someone who knows that fact selected an expensive wine I wouldn't normally consume and ensured it was served tonight at this dinner, where a toast would require me to drink it in front of witnesses." He looked at each capo in turn, watching their faces process the implications. Poisoning the boss at a formal dinner wasn't just attempted murder. It was a declaration of coup, a statement that the existing power structure was being forcibly rearranged. If Jinho had drunk that wine, he would have died in front of his entire leadership. The power vacuum would have been immediate and catastrophic. "Siak," Jinho said quietly, "would you like to explain why the wine you personally selected appears to contain industrial acid?" "I have no idea." Siak's voice was steady, his expression perfectly calibrated to convey shocked innocence. "Boss, I swear, I chose that wine because it's from your predecessor's collection. I thought it would be appropriate for a toast celebrating our achievements. If someone tampered with it, it happened after I made the selection." "After you made the selection?" Jinho repeated the words slowly, testing them. "Which would require someone with access to the wine cellar, knowledge of which bottle you chose, and the skill to inject poison without leaving visible tampering marks. That's a very specific set of requirements. Which is why we need to investigate immediately." Siak gestured to the smoking carpet. "Someone in this organization just tried to kill you, boss. This is an internal threat. We need to identify who had access, who had motive. I know who has motive. Jinho stood, still holding Malik. The baby grabbed his collar, holding on as Jinho walked slowly around the table toward Siak's position. I know who's been running a lone sharking operation in my territory. I know who planted a listening device in my office. I know who's been systematically compromising my security while positioning himself as my most loyal advisor. So let's skip the investigation and move directly to the confession. Siak didn't move. His hand, resting on the table, was perfectly steady. Boss, if you're accusing me of attempted murder based on the fact that I selected a wine that someone else poisoned, that's... I'm accusing you of attempted murder because my son knocked the glass out of my hand before I could drink it. Jinho stopped directly in front of Siak, close enough to see the other man's pupils dilate with adrenaline. My son, who has no training, no experience, no reason to suspect anything, was wrong except for the kind of instinct that separates survivors from corpses. He saw you offer a toast. He saw me reach for the glass. And something in his baby brain said that's dangerous, and he acted on it. Malik chose this moment to reach toward Siak, his small hand outstretched. Then he pulled it back, made a disgusted face, and buried his head in Jinho's shoulder. Even he knows you're poison, Jinho observed. The other capos had gone very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence or flight. They were watching this confrontation with the detached interest of people calculating which side would win and which side they needed to be on when the dust settled. Siak's smile had finally cracked, revealing something cold underneath. You have no proof, just paranoia and a baby who knocked over a glass. That's not evidence. That's coincidence. Coincidence. Jinho shifted Malik to his other arm, freeing his right hand. You're right. It's a coincidence that you gave me a security report about vulnerable employees the same day my maid's son found your listening device. It's a coincidence that you personally selected tonight's wine. It's a coincidence that the wine contained enough acid to dissolve carpet. All just coincidence. He took another step closer. Siak took a corresponding step back. Here's what's going to happen, Jinho continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You're going to leave this dinner. You're going to return to your apartment. You're going to spend tonight thinking about whether you want to run or fight. Because tomorrow, I'm going to dismantle everything you've built. Every shell company, every off-books operation, every asset you thought you'd hidden. I'm going to trace everyone you've stolen back to its source. And then I'm going to give you one chance, one single chance, to return what you've taken and disappear. And if I don't, Siak's voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. Then the next formal dinner will feature you as the centerpiece. Jinho smiled, and it was the smile that had earned him his nickname in Busan. And I won't be serving wine. The room held its breath. 12 capos, 6 servers, 2 armed guards by the door, all of them waiting to see if this would end in words or bullets. Siak looked at Jinho, looked at Malik, still clinging to Jinho's shoulder, looked at the smoking carpet, evidence of his failure literally dissolving between them. You're making a mistake, he said finally. That baby has made you weak, sentimental. The old you would have killed me already. The fact that you're giving me a chance to run proves you've lost your edge. The old me would have drunk the wine. Jinho adjusted his hold on Malik, feeling the baby's heartbeat against his chest, steady and trusting. The old me would have trusted my lieutenant's loyalty over a baby's instincts. The old me would be dead right now, poisoned at my own dinner table. So if being weak means listening to people who don't have a reason to lie to me, then yes, I've gotten weak. He turned, addressing the room. This dinner is over, everyone out, except Siak. He and I have one more thing to discuss. The capos evacuated with the speed of people fleeing a burning building. The servers followed. The guards remained by the door, waiting for orders. When the room was empty except for Jinho, Malik, Siak, and the 2 armed men, Jinho spoke again. You have 12 hours. Use them wisely. 12 hours to do what? To decide if you want to die in Seoul or die somewhere else. Jinho walked toward the exit, passing within arm's reach of Siak. Because you're dead either way, the only variable is location. He left Siak standing alone in the dining room, surrounded by untouched food and smoking carpet, and carried Malik back to the penthouse where Denise was waiting. She took one look at his face and asked, "What happened?" "Someone tried to poison me." Jinho handed Malik to her, watching the baby immediately start demanding dinner. "Your son saved my life by knocking the glass out of my hand, which means I now owe my survival to a baby with no tactical training and no concept of chemistry." "Oh my God," Denise's face had gone pale. "Was it?" "Siak, yes." Jinho walked to the window, looking out over the compound. Somewhere down there, Siak was probably making phone calls, activating contingencies, preparing for war. "He tried to kill me in front of my entire leadership, which means he's either desperate or confident, possibly both." "What are you going to do?" Jinho watched the city lights, thinking about wine that sizzled and bobbies who trusted him and lieutenants who poisoned toasts. "I'm going to give him 12 hours to run, and then I'm going to hunt him down and end this." "That's mercy." "That's strategy." Jinho turned to face her. "If I kill him tonight, his allies will call it paranoia. If I give him a chance to run and he uses it to attack instead, then everyone will know he chose war, and wars I can win." Malik reached for Jinho from Denise's arms, making grabby hands and demanding, "Papa." Jinho took him back, feeling the weight of the baby against his chest, the trust implicit in the gesture. "He saved my life," he said quietly. "A baby who can barely walk saved my life because he saw danger where I saw tradition. Maybe I have gotten weak." "Or maybe," Denise said softly, "you've gotten something better than strong. You've gotten lucky." Jinho looked at Malik, who was trying to eat his collar. "Maybe," he agreed, "but luck runs out, strength endures, and tomorrow I'm going to need both." Siak just tried to poison a man while he was holding a baby. That is a new level of evil. Would you have let a monster like that leave the room alive? Let us know in the comments. Would you show mercy or end him right there? The diamonds appeared in Denise's room at 4 a.m, which Jinho knew because that's when his security system logged an unauthorized entry into the penthouse guest quarters. The alert came through on his phone while he was standing at the window of his bedroom, watching Sol wake up and wondering if Siak had chosen flight or fight. The notification was brief. Motion detected. Guest room. Duration, 43 seconds. 43 seconds was exactly long enough to plant evidence and leave. Jinho had pulled on clothes and walked down the hallway to find Denise's door slightly ajar, the room dark and silent. He'd checked on her first, still sleeping. Malik curled against her in the bed they shared because the crib had proven unpopular with a baby who decided proximity to his mother was non-negotiable. Both of them breathing steady, undisturbed, unaware that someone had just walked into their room while they slept. Jinho had stood in that doorway for a full minute, processing the implications. Someone had breached his personal floor, had bypassed the thumbprint scanner, the cameras, the 2 guards stationed at the elevator, had entered a room where a woman and baby slept under his protection and had left without waking them. It was either the most impressive security breach he'd ever witnessed, or it was an inside job. He'd suspected the latter. The diamonds themselves weren't discovered until 6 a.m., when Denise had woken up and started preparing Malik's morning bottle. She'd gone to the small dresser where she kept her limited possessions. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, the broken hair clip she refused to throw away, and had opened the top drawer to find a black velvet pouch that hadn't been there the night before. Jinho had heard her gasp from the kitchen, where he'd been reviewing security footage on his tablet. He'd walked to the guest room to find her standing frozen, the pouch open in her hands, diamonds spilling across her palm like frozen tears. 5 stones, each one roughly 3 carats, uncut but valuable, the kind of merchandise that moved through criminal networks with the frequency of currency. The kind of merchandise that had been reported stolen from a 7 Stars warehouse 3 weeks ago. "I didn't," Denise's voice had been barely audible. "Boss, I swear I have never seen these before. I don't know how they got here." Jinho had taken the pouch from her shaking hands. examining the contents with the clinical detachment of someone inventorying evidence. The diamonds matched the description from the theft report. 5 stones, uncut, Botswana origin, total value approximately 800 million won. They'd been taken during a shipment transfer, and the theft had triggered an internal investigation that had so far yielded nothing except paranoia, and 3 fired warehouse workers who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now the diamonds had materialized in the room of a woman who'd been in Jinho's compound for less than 2 weeks, who had access to his private floor, who could theoretically have used that access to gather intelligence about shipment schedules and security protocols. It was damning. It was perfectly damning. It was so perfectly damning that Jinho knew immediately it was manufactured. By the time Lieutenant Siak arrived at 7 a.m., summoned by an anonymous tip that Jinho suspected came from Siak himself, half the compound's leadership was already assembled in Jinho's living room. The capos who'd witnessed the poisoning attempt had been joined by the heads of security, the warehouse managers, and 3 soldiers whose job was to stand there looking intimidating, while Jinho decided whether to execute someone before breakfast. Siak had entered the penthouse with the measured calm of a man who knew exactly what he'd find and had prepared his response accordingly. He'd bowed to Jinho, his expression appropriately grave, and had accepted the velvet pouch when Jinho handed it to him. "The stolen diamonds," Siak had said, his voice pitched for the assembled audience. "Found in Miss Albright's possession. Boss, I understand this is difficult, but the evidence is clear. She had access, opportunity, and now we've discovered she had possession of stolen property. Under syndicate law, the penalty for theft is—" "I'm aware what the penalty is." Jinho had been sitting on his couch, Malik on the floor beside him playing with wooden blocks, completely oblivious to the trial taking place above his head. "I wrote half of those laws myself. The question isn't what the penalty should be. The question is whether the evidence is legitimate." The diamonds were found in her room, in her dresser. Siak had held up the pouch like Exhibit A in a prosecution. "Unless you're suggesting someone planted them, which would require access to your personal floor, knowledge of her room layout, and the ability to bypass security systems that you personally designed. That's not a realistic scenario." "It's exactly as realistic as me drinking poisoned wine at dinner last night." Jinho's voice had been quiet, but the room had gone silent anyway. "Both scenarios require insider access. Both scenarios require detailed knowledge of my routines and vulnerabilities. Both scenarios benefit the same person." Siak's expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had sharpened. "Boss, if you're suggesting I planted evidence to frame Miss Albright, that's a serious accusation, one that would require proof beyond speculation." "You're right." Jinho had picked up his tablet, swiping through the security footage he'd been reviewing. "So let's look at the evidence. At 4:07 this morning, my security system logged an unauthorized entry into the guest quarters. The entry was achieved using an administrative override code, the kind of code that only 3 people in this compound possess. Myself, my head of security, and my lieutenant." He turned the tablet around, showing the timestamp and access log. "I was in my room. My head of security," Jinho had nodded to T, standing by the window, "was monitoring the overnight watch from the security center. His keycard logs confirm he never left that station, which means the only person who could have used an administrative override to enter that room at 4 a.m. was you, Lieutenant." The room had absorbed this information, with the collective stillness of people watching an execution unfold in real time. "That's circumstantial." Siak's voice had remained steady, but Jinho could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. "I could have given my code to someone else. It could have been spoofed. Administrative overrides can be hacked if you have the right equipment." "True." Jinho had set down the tablet. "So let's add more evidence. The diamonds were stolen 3 weeks ago during a shipment transfer that you personally supervised. The theft was reported to me by you. The investigation was conducted by security personnel that you selected. And somehow, despite all that oversight, the diamonds remained missing until they conveniently appeared in the room of a woman you've been arguing I should remove from the compound since the day I brought her here. Jinho had stood, walking slowly toward Siak. His hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed in a way that made everyone in the room tense. Here's what I think happened. I think you stole those diamonds 3 weeks ago and held on to them as insurance. When I gave you 12 hours to run last night, you realized you needed a new strategy. You couldn't kill me. You'd tried that and failed. You couldn't discredit me. I have too much support. So you decided to discredit the people I've been protecting. Make it look like Denise is a spy, a thief, someone who used her proximity to me to gather intelligence and steal merchandise. If you could prove she was dirty, it would make me look weak, compromised, emotionally manipulated by a woman who was playing me the entire time. He'd stopped directly in front of Siak, close enough to see the other man's jaw tighten. It's actually a decent strategy, if the evidence was legitimate, if I didn't know you'd been trying to kill me, if I hadn't spent the last week watching you systematically sabotage your own cover story. Siak had held Jinho's gaze, and for a moment, the mask had slipped entirely. What Jinho saw underneath wasn't fear or remorse. It was cold, calculating rage, the kind of rage that came from realizing you'd overplayed your hand and underestimated your opponent. You can't prove any of this, Siak had said quietly. You have circumstantial evidence and conspiracy theories. What I have is stolen property found in the possession of someone who had both access and opportunity. Under syndicate law, that's enough for execution. If you refuse to enforce your own laws, it sends a message that rules don't matter. That loyalty doesn't matter. That anyone sleeping in the boss's bed gets immunity. The room had shifted uncomfortably at that last phrase. Several of the capos had exchanged glances, and Jinho had seen the calculation in their expressions. Was Siak right? Was Jinho compromised? Had sentiment made him weak? Jinho had turned away from Siak, walking back to where Denise stood by the window. She'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, her arms wrapped around her torso, her face pale but composed. She'd looked at him with a kind of desperate hope that came from knowing your life depended on someone else's decision and having no control over the outcome. The code demands death, Jinho had said, speaking to the room but looking at Denise. Theft from the 7 Stars Syndicate is punishable by execution. No exceptions, no mercy. That's been the rule since before I took control, and I've enforced it consistently. Every person in this room knows what happens to thieves. He'd seen her face crumble, seen the hope drain away and get replaced with resignation. She'd glanced toward the couch where Malik was still playing, oblivious, and Jinho had watched her memorize his face like she was saying goodbye. However, Jinho had continued, his voice cutting through the room's anticipation, the code also states that evidence must be uncontaminated, and the accused must have had clear opportunity. In this case, the evidence appeared in a secured location that the accused couldn't have accessed without administrative privileges she doesn't possess. The theft occurred during a transfer supervised by the person now presenting the evidence. And the discovery of said evidence comes exactly 12 hours after I gave that same person an ultimatum to leave or face consequences. He'd picked up the velvet pouch from where Siak had set it on the coffee table. This isn't evidence of Denise's guilt. This is evidence of Siak's desperation. And I don't execute people based on evidence that's been manufactured by someone trying to save themselves. The room had erupted. Not in protest. No one was stupid enough to openly challenge Jinho, but in a sudden release of held breath, nervous laughter, the shuffling of feet that suggested everyone had been expecting violence and was relieved it was being directed elsewhere. Siak had gone very still. Boss, if you ignore clear evidence because of personal feelings, you undermine the entire organization. These men, he'd gestured to the assembled capos, they need to know that rules apply equally. That proximity to power doesn't grant immunity. If you let her go, you're saying that anyone you care about is above the law. I'm saying that anyone who manufactures evidence to frame innocent people is beneath contempt. Jinho had closed his hand around the diamonds, feeling the stones press into his palm. I'm saying that the rule of law requires actual evidence, not circumstantial theater designed to manipulate my decision-making. And I'm saying that after last night's poisoning attempt, after the listening device, after the loan sharking operation, after every single piece of treachery you've committed, you don't get to lecture me about the integrity of our legal system. He'd thrown the pouch at Siak's chest. The lieutenant had caught it reflexively, and Jinho had seen the moment he realized his gambit had failed. Your 12 hours are up, Jinho had said. You chose to fight instead of run, so let's fight. But we're going to do it honestly with real evidence and actual combat, not with planted diamonds and poisoned wine. You want to challenge my leadership? Fine. Do it directly. Call a vote. Demand a duel. Invoke whatever traditional mechanism you prefer. But stop hiding behind theater and expecting me not to notice. Siak had looked at the assembled capos, calculating whether any of them would support him in an open challenge. Jinho had seen him do the math, seen him count allies and enemies, weigh odds and outcomes. The room's energy had been clearly against Siak. The poisoning attempt had cost him credibility. The framing of Denise had cost him respect. He was isolated. This isn't over, Siak had said finally, his voice low and venomous. You think you're protecting them, but you're just painting a target on their backs. Every enemy you have will see them as the easy way to hurt you. Every rival will know that the way to the butcher of Busan is through a maid and her baby. You've made yourself vulnerable. I was always vulnerable. Jinho had walked to the couch, picking up Malik, who'd abandoned the blocks and was demanding attention. The difference is now I'm choosing what's worth being vulnerable for, and it's not loyalty bought with fear. It's not an organization built on people who'd poison me the moment my back is turned. He'd looked at Denise, still standing by the window, tears streaming down her face in silent relief. Looked at Malik, reaching for his collar with absolute trust. Looked at the assembled capos, watching this entire scene with varying degrees of confusion and fascination. It's this, he'd finished. Whatever this is, it's worth more than an empire built on people like you. Siak had left without another word. The capos had filed out after him, their expressions carefully neutral, their body language suggesting they'd just witnessed something significant but weren't sure what. T had remained, along with the 3 soldiers, waiting for instructions. Follow him, Jinho had ordered. I want to know where he goes, who he contacts, what he does. If he reaches for a weapon, kill him. If he reaches for a phone, record the conversation. If he tries to leave the compound, delay him until I get there. But don't let him out of your sight. T had nodded and left, taking the soldiers with him. Alone with Denise and Malik, Jinho had felt the adrenaline start to fade, leaving behind exhaustion and the hollow feeling that came from making decisions that would have consequences he couldn't predict. Thank you, Denise had whispered. Boss, I don't know how to. Stop calling me boss when we're alone. Jinho had adjusted Malik on his hip, the motion automatic now. It's strange. You live in my house. You eat at my table. Your son calls me Papa. Formality seems redundant at this point. What should I call you? Jinho. He'd said his own name, and it had sounded foreign, like a word from a language he'd forgotten how to speak. That's my name. Use it. She'd nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Jinho, then. Thank you, Jinho, for believing me, for trusting me when the evidence said you shouldn't. I didn't trust the evidence. I trusted you. He'd walked to the window, looking out over the compound. Siak was right about one thing. This makes you a target. Every enemy I have will see you and Malik as the easiest way to hurt me, which means you can't leave this penthouse without armed escort. You can't answer the door without checking the security feed. You can't trust anyone in this compound except the people I explicitly clear. That sounds like a prison. That sounds like survival. Jinho had turned to face her. I ignored the code today. I chose my gut over the rules that have kept this organization stable for 2 decades. That's going to have consequences. Some of my men will respect it. Others will see it as weakness. And Siak will use it as evidence that I'm compromised, that I'm not fit to lead. That sentiment has made me vulnerable to manipulation. So why did you do it? Denise had moved closer, her voice barely above a whisper. If you knew the consequences, why ignore the code? Jinho had looked at Malik, trying to eat his shirt collar. Because the code was written by men who believed loyalty could be bought with fear and maintained through violence. And I've spent 2 weeks watching a baby teach me that the most valuable loyalty is the kind you can't buy. The kind that knocks poison out of your hand because you're worth protecting. The kind that doesn't calculate cost-benefit analysis before deciding whether to save your life. He'd met her eyes. Siak said proximity to me doesn't grant immunity. He's wrong. Proximity to me means I protect what's mine, and you're mine now, both of you, not as property, not as possessions, as... He'd struggled for the word, for a concept that didn't exist in the vocabulary of violence and crime that had defined his entire adult life. As family, Denise had finished softly. Jinho had nodded, because saying it himself would have felt like weakness, and he'd already shown enough of that for one morning. Malik had grabbed his face with both hands, forcing Jinho to look at him. Papa, the baby had said seriously, like he was imparting wisdom. Yeah, Jinho had agreed. That's the problem, kid. I'm your papa now, which means I have to keep you alive, which means I have to win this war, which means I have to be willing to burn down everything I built to protect what actually matters. He'd looked at Denise. You should know that's what's coming. Fire, blood, a reckoning with everyone who thought loyalty meant obedience. Are you prepared for that? No, she'd said honestly, but I'm here anyway. Good, Jinho had handed Malik to her. Because ready or not, it's starting. And this time I'm not following the code. I'm writing a new one. The attack came at 2 a.m, which meant Siak had spent the intervening hours since his humiliation recruiting, planning, and preparing for the kind of assault that required either tremendous resources or tremendous desperation. Jinho suspected it was both. The first explosion took out the compound's main generator, plunging 3 floors into darkness and triggering the emergency backup systems that bathed everything in red emergency lighting. Jinho was awake when it happened. He'd been awake since midnight, standing at the penthouse windows with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking, watching the compound's perimeter and waiting for exactly this kind of move. He'd known Siak wouldn't run. Men like Siak didn't run when they were cornered. They attacked, because attacking felt like control even when it was suicide. The second explosion hit the East Wing Guard Station, eliminating the first line of defense and creating a breach point that would allow hostile forces to enter without triggering the main alarm system. Jinho had watched the fireball bloom against the night sky and had immediately moved toward the nursery, his mind already calculating vectors, timelines, defensive positions. He'd found Denise standing in the doorway of Malik's room, the baby clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from understanding you were under attack, but not understanding by whom or why. We're leaving, Jinho had said, not stopping to explain. He'd grabbed the go bag he'd prepared the day after the diamond incident, the one containing cash, passports, ammunition, and everything necessary to disappear if the compound became untenable. The panic room, now. What's happening? Siak is happening. Jinho had pulled his primary weapon from the safe in his bedroom, a Glock 19, Austrian made, 15 rounds in the magazine plus 1 in the chamber. 16 bullets total. He'd grabbed 2 spare magazines, shoving them in his pockets. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but enough to get them to safety if he was smart about ammunition conservation. The panic room was 3 floors down, buried in the compound's foundation, surrounded by reinforced concrete and equipped with independent air supply, communications equipment, and enough supplies to survive a siege lasting weeks. Getting there required descending through the building's central stairwell, the most direct route, but also the most exposed. Jinho had installed alternate routes, hidden passages that connected critical areas, but those took time and Siak knew about most of them. Speed was more valuable than stealth right now. They'd made it to the 2nd floor landing when the 3rd explosion hit, this one inside the building, close enough that Jinho felt the shockwave through the walls. The blast had come from the security center, which meant T and his team were either dead or fighting. Either way, Jinho's intelligence network had just been decapitated. He was operating blind. "Stay behind me," he'd ordered Denise, positioning himself between her and the stairwell descending to the first floor. "If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back, don't wait for me, just get Malik to the panic room. The code is 7395. Can you remember that?" 7395, she'd repeated, her voice shaking but functional. "Good. If I don't make it, you seal yourself in and you use the radio to contact." Footsteps on the stairs below, multiple sets, moving fast, tactical boots on concrete. Jinho had pulled Denise back from the landing, pressing her against the wall as he'd aimed down the stairwell. 4 men came into view, not his soldiers, wrong uniforms, carrying weapons that weren't 7 stars standard issue. Mercenaries. Siak had hired professional operators, which meant he'd spent serious money on this assault. Jinho had fired 3 times. 2 headshots, 1 center mass. 3 men down before they'd registered the threat. The 4th had scrambled back behind the corner, shouting something in English, American accent, probably ex-military, definitely experienced. "Contact, 2nd floor, 1 hostile armed." More footsteps, more voices. Jinho had grabbed Denise's wrist and pulled her toward the east corridor, away from the stairwell, toward the service elevator that would take them down to the sublevel. It was slower than the stairs but more defensible, smaller space, single entry point, easier to control. They'd made it halfway down the corridor when the elevator doors at the far end had opened, and 3 more mercenaries had emerged, weapons raised, moving with the coordinated precision of a trained unit. Jinho had pushed Denise into a doorway, someone's office, dark and empty, and had fired twice more. 1 hit, 1 miss. The hit dropped a mercenary. The other 2 had returned fire, and Jinho had felt the doorframe splinter next to his head as bullets tore through wood and drywall. 13 rounds left, -2, 11. He'd pulled Denise deeper into the office, away from the door, toward the windows that overlooked the interior courtyard. 3 stories up. Bulletproof glass. Not an exit unless he wanted to test whether the glass was actually bulletproof or just bullet-resistant, and the difference mattered when you were holding a baby. Malik was crying now, the sound sharp and terrified in the darkness. Jinho had looked at Denise, her face pale in the emergency lighting, her whole body shaking but her arms steady around her son, and had made a decision. "The bathroom," he'd said, pointing to a door in the corner of the office. "Lock yourself in. Don't come out until I come get you. If anyone else tries to open that door, you scream." "What are you going to do?" "Create a distraction." Jinho had moved back toward the office entrance, checking the corridor through the shattered doorframe. The 2 mercenaries were advancing, moving slowly, professionally, checking corners and clearing sight lines. They knew he was cornered. They could afford to be patient. Jinho couldn't afford patience. Every second they delayed was another second for Siak to position more forces, seal more exits, turn this from an escape into a siege. He'd fired twice more, forcing the mercenaries into cover, buying Denise time to get to the bathroom. He'd heard the lock click just as return fire shredded the rest of the doorframe, bullets punching through the wall at chest height, searching for flesh. 9 rounds left. Jinho had rolled away from the door, coming up behind a desk that was heavy enough to provide actual cover rather than just concealment. He'd fired once, a controlled shot that caught a mercenary in the throat as the man had leaned around the corner. The body had dropped, thrashing, drowning in its own blood. 8 rounds, 1 mercenary left in the corridor, unknown number elsewhere in the building. The remaining mercenary had pulled back, shouting into a radio. "Target is barricaded, 2nd floor, east wing. Civilian hostages present, requesting additional support." Hostages? They thought Denise and Malik were leverage. That was useful information. It meant Siak wanted them alive, which meant they'd hesitate before using explosive ordnance or overwhelming firepower. It gave Jinho an advantage. He'd used that advantage to move, abandoning the desk cover and sprinting toward the corridor while the mercenary was still communicating. He'd fired 3 times, One miss, two hits, sent her mass both times. The mercenary had gone down hard, his radio clattering across the floor. 5 rounds left. Jinho had retrieved the mercenary's weapon, an M4 carbine, American-made, 30-round magazine still mostly full. He'd slung it over his shoulder, grabbed the spare magazines from the dead man's vest, and had returned to the office. "Denise," he'd knocked on the bathroom door. "It's me, we're moving." The door had opened immediately. Denise had emerged with Malik, the baby still crying but quieter now, exhausted by fear. She'd looked at Jinho's new weapon, at the blood on his hands, at the bodies visible in the corridor, and she hadn't flinched. Just nodded once, adjusted her grip on Malik, and waited for instructions. "The stairwell is compromised. The elevator is compromised. We're taking the maintenance shaft." Jinho had moved to the corner of the office where a heating grate covered an access point to the building's ventilation system. He'd pulled the grate free, revealing a space just large enough for a person to crawl through. "It connects to the sub-level mechanical room. From there, we can reach the panic room." "That's barely big enough for one person." "Which is why they won't expect it." Jinho had boosted Denise toward the opening. "You first. I'll hand you Malik once you're in. Move fast, stay quiet. If you hit a junction, go down, always down." She'd climbed in, the space so tight she'd had to move sideways, her breathing loud in the metal tunnel. Jinho had handed Malik up, watching the baby disappear into darkness with his mother. Then he'd climbed in himself, pulling the grate closed behind him, sealing them in a space that smelled like dust and machinery and recycled air. They'd crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably 10 minutes, the metal shaft conducting sound in ways that made every movement feel deafening. Jinho had led them through junctions and turns, following a mental map of the building's infrastructure, listening for sounds of pursuit above and below. They'd been halfway to the mechanical room when Jinho had heard it. Footsteps in the corridor they'd just left, voices speaking in Korean this time, Siok's voice recognizable even through metal and concrete. "They're in the ventilation system. Seal the exits. I want men at every access point between here and the basement." Jinho had frozen, his mind racing through options. If Siok sealed the vents, they'd be trapped in a metal coffin, unable to advance or retreat. But if they emerged now, they'd be walking into an ambush. He'd made the decision in under 2 seconds. "Keep moving," he'd whispered to Denise. "Faster." They'd crawled faster, the shaft getting narrower, the air getting thicker. Malik had started crying again, the sound echoing off metal, advertising their location to anyone listening. Jinho had tried to muffle it with his hand, but the baby had fought him, terrified by darkness and confinement. They'd reached the mechanical room access grate just as Jinho had heard the scraping sound of someone prying open a vent junction behind them. Close, too close. He'd kicked the grate free and had dropped into the mechanical room, a space filled with HVAC equipment, water heaters, electrical panels. Dark except for emergency lighting, defensible if they had time. They didn't have time. Jinho had caught Denise as she dropped, then Malik, then had grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door that led to the panic room corridor. He'd opened it exactly 3 inches, enough to see through the gap, and had immediately pulled back. 4 mercenaries in the hallway, stationed at intervals, waiting. 7 bullets in his pistol, 5 in his rifle. No, he'd miscounted, he'd used 3 upstairs, 2 bullets, against 4 trained operators. The math didn't work. "We're trapped," Denise had whispered, clutching Malik. Jinho had looked around the mechanical room, cataloging resources, heavy equipment, pipes, electrical cables, nothing immediately useful as a weapon, nothing except. His eyes had landed on a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Not a weapon, but a tool. Tools could be weapons if you were creative. "Stay here," he'd told Denise. "Behind that water heater, don't move." He'd grabbed the extinguisher, checked the pressure gauge, full, and had formulated a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. He'd positioned himself by the door, taken 3 deep breaths, and had kicked it open. The mercenaries had turned toward the sound. Jinho had discharged the extinguisher directly into the corridor, filling the space with white chemical fog that obliterated visibility. Then he dropped the extinguisher, raised his rifle, and had advanced into the cloud. 2 shots, 2 bodies. The mercenaries had been firing blind, bullets whipping through the fog, one round catching Jinho in the shoulder. Not deep, grazed more than penetrated, but it burned like acid. He dropped the rifle, pulled his pistol, and had fired 3 more times. 1 hit, 2 misses. 4 bullets left, 1 mercenary still active. The fog had started to clear. Jinho had seen the last mercenary, younger than the others, scared but trained, raising his weapon. Jinho had raised his pistol. They'd both had clear shots. The shot came from behind Jinho. He turned to see Denise standing in the mechanical room doorway, holding a heavy ceramic vase that had been decorating some executive's office upstairs. She must have grabbed it during their escape. She'd brought it down on the mercenary's head with enough force to shatter both the vase and the man's skull. The mercenary had dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Denise had stood there, breathing hard, pieces of broken ceramic and blood on her hands, staring at what she'd done with the expression of someone who'd just discovered something terrible about themselves. "You saved my life," Jinho had said. "I know," her voice had been hollow. "I didn't think, he was going to shoot you and Malik needs you and You're a survivor." Jinho had taken the remains of the vase from her shaking hands. "That's what survivors do. They do what needs to be done and process the trauma later." The corridor was clear. 4 bodies, blood mixing with fire extinguisher chemicals, the smell of cordite and copper. Jinho had reloaded his pistol with his last spare magazine, 15 rounds, and had led them toward the panic room. They'd made it to the reinforced door without encountering additional resistance. Jinho had punched in the code, 7-3-9-5, and the locks had disengaged with a heavy mechanical sound. The door had swung open, revealing the panic room beyond. Cramped, utilitarian, equipped with everything necessary to wait out an apocalypse. "Get inside," Jinho had ordered. "Lock it behind me." "You're not coming." "Not yet. Siak is still out there. If I lock myself in, he wins by default. He consolidates control, eliminates my loyalists, tells everyone I died during the attack." Jinho had checked his weapon. "I need to end this, tonight, while his forces are committed and his attention is divided." "You're going to fight your way through an entire building, full of mercenaries with 15 bullets. 14. Jinho had already used one to put down a mercenary who'd been twitching. And yes, because the alternative is letting him win. Denise had looked at him for a long moment. Then she'd handed Malik to him, the baby reaching for Jinho with sticky fingers. "Then you'd better come back, because he's going to need his papa." Jinho had held Malik briefly, feeling the small heartbeat against his chest, the absolute trust that still existed despite everything the baby had witnessed tonight. He'd kissed the top of Malik's head, a gesture that felt foreign and necessary, and had handed him back to Denise. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me, if I don't come back by dawn." "You'll come back," Denise's voice was firm, "because survivors do what needs to be done, and you need to survive this." Jinho had nodded once, then had stepped back into the corridor as the panic room door had sealed with the finality of a tomb. He'd stood alone in the blood-stained hallway, 14 rounds in his weapon, an unknown number of enemies in the building, and one clear objective: find Lieutenant Siak and end this war. The compound had become a battlefield. Jinho had become the predator he'd always been. And somewhere above him, Siak was about to learn that cornering the butcher of Busan was the last mistake you ever made. Jinho found Siak in the compound's central courtyard, which made sense because Siak had always been theatrical about his violence. The courtyard was where Jinho's predecessor had held executions, where loyalty had been tested, and traitors had been made examples of, where blood had soaked into decorative stones that cost more than most people's homes. It was fitting that Siak would choose this location for his last stand. Poetic even, in the way desperate men often were when they knew they were about to die. The battle for the compound had lasted 3 hours. Jinho had moved through the building like smoke, using passages and shortcuts that Siok's mercenaries didn't know existed, picking off isolated operators with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years learning how to kill professionally. He'd run out of ammunition on the second floor, had taken a weapon from a dead mercenary, had run out of ammunition again in the east wing. By the time he'd reached the courtyard, he was down to a knife he'd pulled from someone's throat and the kind of rage that made weapons irrelevant. Siok stood in the center of the courtyard, illuminated by emergency floodlights that had kicked on when the main power grid had been destroyed. He was surrounded by bodies, some mercenaries, some 7 Stars soldiers, all of them casualties of a coup that had failed the moment Denise had smashed that vase into a man's skull and proved that survival wasn't about training, it was about will. "You look terrible," Siok said when Jinho emerged from the south entrance. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his expensive suit torn and stained, his weapon, a pistol Jinho recognized as one from the compound's armory, held loosely at his side. "I was expecting the legendary Butcher of Busan to make a more impressive entrance. Instead, you look like you crawled through the garbage." "I crawled through the ventilation system." Jinho moved slowly into the courtyard, keeping distance between them, his knife held in a reverse grip that suggested familiarity with close-quarters combat. "The garbage would have been cleaner." "Where's the woman, the baby?" Siok's eyes tracked the entrances, looking for additional threats. "I assume they're locked in your precious panic room, safe and sound while you play hero." "They're exactly where they need to be, which is more than I can say for you." Jinho stopped 20 feet from Siok, far enough that a pistol shot would require actual aim, close enough that he could close the distance in under 3 seconds if necessary. "You lost. Your mercenaries are dead or scattered. Your supporters in the organization watched you try to poison me, watched you frame an innocent woman, watched you attack your own compound with hired guns. Whatever loyalty you had is gone." "Loyalty?" Siok laughed, the sound bitter and exhausted. "You're lecturing me about loyalty. You, who threw away 2 decades of tradition for a woman you've known for 2 weeks. Who ignored clear evidence of theft because you were too sentimental to execute your own rules. Who let a baby dictate organizational policy." He raised his pistol, not aiming yet, just holding it between them like a negotiating point. "I gave you everything. I built this empire with you. I bled for you. And the moment you decided to play father to a child that isn't yours, you threw it all away. You want to talk about loyalty? I was loyal until you stopped being worthy of it. You were loyal until you thought you could take what I built." Jinho shifted his weight, preparing for the moment when words would stop and violence would start. The listening device, the loan sharking, the poison, those weren't acts of desperation. Those were moves in a coup you'd been planning for months. You just waited for me to give you an excuse to justify it. "Because you did give me an excuse." Siok's voice rose, cracking with frustration. "You brought a maid into your home. You gave her access to intelligence worth millions. You let her baby compromise security protocols that cost us 3 years to establish. And then you protected her when evidence proved she was a thief. What was I supposed to do? Watch you destroy everything we built because you got lonely? You were supposed to trust that I knew what I was doing." Jinho's voice was quiet, final. "That's what loyalty actually means, not blind obedience, not waiting for me to fail so you can take over. Trust that when I make a decision that looks insane, there's a reason behind it." And what reason could possibly justify throwing away an empire for a woman and a baby? "Because they're worth more than the empire." Jinho said it simply, like he was stating an obvious fact. "Because I spent 20 years building an organization based on fear, and fear works until it doesn't. Until someone more frightening comes along, or until your own people decide the fear isn't worth the profit, or until you realize that everyone around you is waiting for you to show weakness so they can put a knife in your back. That's not an empire. That's a prison, where the warden is just as trapped as the inmates." He took a step forward. Siok raised his pistol, actually aiming now, his finger moving toward the trigger. "But loyalty that's given freely," Jinho continued. Loyalty that exists because someone actually values your survival instead of calculating whether killing you would be profitable. That's power you can't buy. That's strength that doesn't collapse the moment you turn your back. And yes, I found that in a maid and her baby instead of in the men I'd spent years cultivating. That should tell you something about the men I was cultivating. It tells me you've gone soft. Siak's hand was steady now, the pistol aimed at Jinho's center mass, professional and practiced. It tells me you're not fit to lead, and it tells me that what I'm about to do isn't murder, it's a mercy killing. Putting down a man who's already dead, he just doesn't know it yet. Then do it. Jinho spread his arms, the knife still in his hand but his posture open, vulnerable. Pull the trigger, kill me, take over the 7 stars, and then spend the rest of your very short life wondering who in your organization is doing to you what you did to me, wondering who's planting listening devices, who's plotting coups, who's waiting for you to show weakness so they can justify their betrayal. Siak stared at him, the pistol unwavering. You think I won't? I think you're terrified. Jinho smiled, and it wasn't kind. Because you know that if you kill me here, the capos who survive tonight will ask questions. They'll ask why you needed mercenaries to kill one man, why you destroyed half the compound, why you attacked while the boss was protecting a woman and child. And they'll realize that you didn't win through strength, you won through terrorism. And terrorizing your own people is how you guarantee your own assassination. The pistol trembled slightly. Not much, just enough to be visible. So here's your choice, Jinho continued. You can shoot me and spend the next week watching your back before someone puts a bullet in it. Or you can lower that weapon, leave this compound, and disappear. I'll tell everyone you died in the fighting. I'll give you a funeral with full honors. I'll make you a martyr instead of a traitor. And you get to live somewhere else under a different name with the money you stole before I started auditing your accounts. You'd let me go, Siak's voice was suspicious. After everything I did. I'd let you run. There's a difference. Jinho lowered his arms, the knife disappearing into his belt. Because killing you just creates a power vacuum that someone else will fill with the same ambition and treachery. But letting you go sends a message. It says that betrayal isn't worth the cost, that even if you survive the coup, you lose everything that matters. Your reputation, your power, your place in the organization. You become nothing. Siak stood there for a long moment, the pistol still raised, his face working through calculations and emotions that Jinho could read like text. Pride, rage, fear, exhaustion. The realization that he'd bet everything on one hand and the cards had turned against him. The pistol lowered. I want the money I earned, Siak said. Everything I saved over the years, not the stolen funds, I know you'll seize those, but my legitimate earnings, my salary, my bonuses, my shares. You'll get half. Jinho's voice was firm. The other half goes to the families of the soldiers who died tonight defending the compound you attacked. That's non-negotiable. Siak nodded slowly. And my reputation, the story you tell. You died heroically defending the compound against an attack by a rival syndicate. You saved my life. You'll be remembered as a loyal lieutenant who died serving the 7 stars. Jinho pulled out his phone, typed a message, and sent it. You have 2 hours to collect whatever personal belongings matter to you and leave Seoul. After that, if I see you again, the deal is void and you die. Understood. Understood. Siak set his pistol on the ground, the gesture of surrender unmistakable. He looked at Jinho with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. You really would have drunk that poison if the baby hadn't stopped you. Yes. You really would have executed the woman if the evidence had been legitimate. Yes. Then you're not soft. Siak smiled, broken and bitter. You're just principled. That's almost worse. Soft men can be manipulated. Principled men have to be killed. I should have killed you months ago when I had the chance. You should have stayed loyal. Jinho turned toward the building entrance, where T had appeared with 6 armed guards, all of them loyal soldiers who'd survived the night. Now go, before I change my mind about mercy. Siak left without another word, escorted by 2 of T's men who would ensure he actually departed instead of regrouping for another attempt. Jinho watched him disappear into the building, then turned to survey the courtyard, the bodies, the blood, the wreckage of a coup that had nearly succeeded. Casualties, he asked T. 17 dead, 23 wounded. All the mercenaries are down. We're still clearing the building for stragglers. T's face was grim. Boss, the capos are gathering in the main hall. They want to know what happened. They want to know if you're still in command. Of course I'm still in command. Who else would be? Jinho started walking toward the building, his body starting to register the various injuries he'd accumulated during the fighting. The shoulder wound, the bruised ribs, the dozens smaller cuts and burns that would hurt worse tomorrow. They want reassurance. They want to see you standing. T hesitated. They want to know if the rumors are true about the woman and the baby. Jinho stopped walking. What rumors? That you're keeping them, that they're not just under your protection but actually part of your household, that you're treating the baby as, T struggled with a word, as family. The rumors are true, Jinho resumed walking. Assemble everyone in the main hall, everyone who survived tonight. I'm going to address them. But first, I'm getting Denise and Malik from the panic room. He found them where he'd left them, sealed behind reinforced steel, safe and whole. When the panic room door had opened and Denise had seen him, bloodied, exhausted, but alive, she'd launched herself at him with enough force to make his injured ribs scream. Malik had reached for him immediately, demanding Papa with the impatience of someone who'd been waiting too long. It's over, Jinho had told them. Siak is gone, you're safe. We were always safe, Denise had said, still holding him, because you were protecting us. Now Jinho stood in the main hall with Denise beside him and Malik in his arms, facing an assembly of 53 people, every capo, lieutenant, and senior operator who'd survived the night. They looked exhausted, bloodied, traumatized. They looked at Jinho with expressions ranging from relief to confusion to calculation. Jinho let the silence build, let them see him standing there with a baby on his hip and a woman at his side. Let them absorb the image and decide what it meant. Tonight we were attacked by our own lieutenant, he began, his voice carrying through the hall. A man I trusted, a man you trusted, a man who decided that loyalty was negotiable and power was worth more than principle. He failed, not because our defenses held, they didn't, not because we had superior numbers, we didn't. He failed because the foundation he was attacking wasn't built on fear. It was built on something stronger. He shifted Malik to his other arm, the motion casual, familiar. This baby found a listening device in my office. His mother gave me evidence of lone sharking operations I didn't know existed. Together, they exposed corruption that had been operating for months under my nose. They didn't do it because they were trained. They didn't do it because they were paid. They did it because their survival depended on my survival. Because they had a stake in keeping me alive that had nothing to do with profit margins or territory control. Jinho looked at each face in turn. That's the organization I'm building going forward. Not one based on fear and intimidation, but one based on actual loyalty, where people protect each other because they matter, not because they're profitable. Where a baby can knock poison out of my hand and it's treated as wisdom instead of interference. Where breaking the rules to protect the innocent is respected instead of punished. He paused, then continued. Lieutenant Siak called this weakness, called me compromised, said I was throwing away everything we built for sentiment. He was wrong. Sentiment is temporary. What I have with these two people is permanent. It's family. Jinho pulled Denise closer with his free arm, the gesture possessive and protective. I'm introducing Malik not as the maid's son, but as my heir, as the person who will inherit what I build, as a family. The hall erupted in murmurs. Jinho let them talk, let them process. Then he did something he'd never done in public, something that broke every rule about maintaining distance between the boss and subordinates. He kissed Denise. It wasn't tentative or hidden. It was deliberate, public, unmistakable. A statement that she wasn't staff, wasn't a subordinate, wasn't someone he was protecting out of obligation. She was his, publicly, completely, permanently. The hall went silent. When Jinho pulled back, Denise was crying, her hand pressed to his chest, her face flushed with emotion and relief, and something that looked like love. "That's the barrier broken," Jinho told the assembly. "No more pretending she's just under my protection. No more treating Malik like a security liability. They're family. They're mine. And if anyone has a problem with that, voice it now or accept it forever." No one spoke. "Good." Jinho adjusted Malik, who was trying to eat his collar again. "Then let's rebuild. Let's repair the damage. Let's bury our dead and honor their sacrifice. And let's build something that's actually worth dying for. Not territory, not profit, but each other." He looked at Malik, who looked back at him with those trusting eyes that saw a father instead of a killer. "Family first," Jinho said. "That's the new code, family first." T was the first to respond, his voice loud in the silence. "Family first, boss." One by one, the others joined in. Capos, soldiers, operators, all of them repeating the phrase like an oath. "Family first, family first, family first." Jinho stood there holding his son, with the woman he loved pressed against his side, surrounded by people who'd chosen loyalty over profit. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he was building something that might actually last. The empire of fear had fallen. The empire of family had begun. And Seoul would learn that the Butcher of Busan had found something more dangerous than violence. He'd found something worth protecting. Siak destroyed everything because he was greedy for power he didn't earn. The system was broken, but Jinho fixed it by choosing family over tradition. If you believe loyalty is more important than money, comment "family first" below.